Mail order, bride bruised and alone, until the cowboy whispered, "You're safe in my arms." Before we begin, take a moment to comment your city. Where are you watching from tonight? And once the story is over, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Now lean back, close your eyes, and enjoy the story. It was early morning at Double H Ranch. A thin ribbon of gold slipped through the window glass, settling on the wooden dust like drifting pollen. Olivia stood by the pane, her hands clutching the faded photograph of the family she had lost. A crack across the frame split like dry lightning across her heart. Beyond the walls, the desert wind howled, leaving a low, hollow rumble like a warning stretched across the horizon. From town, faint echoes carried back. The sharp click of spurs striking the saloon floorboards. Then silence, abrupt final, as if someone had stopped mid-step. The last red ember of last night's sky bled into dawn, staining the fence posts a pale shade of fire. On the porch, the shadow of a man appeared, hat pulled low, coat heavy with trail dust. His hand rested lightly on the grip of his revolver as he faced the stranger at the gate. Olivia did not turn, but in the window's reflection, her eyes showed a loneliness so bare, so raw, it seemed to whisper, "If no miracle comes today, I will have nowhere left to go." The wind shifted. His hand slipped slowly away from the gun, and for the first time, his voice broke the silence low and steady. "You don't belong to the fear out there. Here, you're safe." The desert wind carried on sweeping red dust through the streets of Willow Creek. Only a handful of weathered buildings stood a saloon, with a tin roof creaking in the breeze, a small rail station with rusted tracks, and the empty porches where spurs had once marked their rhythm. The whole town seemed to wait like a sentence never spoken, just the wind's howl and the saloon doors knocking against each other. Against the brightening sky, a lone figure appeared. A cowboy in a dark coat, wide-brimmed hat, shading half his face. His boots, heavy with dust reins, drawn tight on a horse near spent from the long road. Elijah Hastings, 34, owner of a small ranch on the edge of the valley. Years ago, he had lost his fiancée, and since then had chosen silence. He worked the land kept to himself, but his eyes still carried the steady flame of a man who would not bend. This morning, Elijah was setting fence posts when he noticed the figure of a woman crossing his porch. Olivia Thompson, a stranger. Slim frame eyes heavy with sorrow, as though she had left her whole past behind at the train station. They did not speak, only exchanged a glance, quiet searching. Yet in that silence, something bound them. Loneliness met loneliness, and sorrow for the first time found an echo. One fleeting look, but in it a promise not yet spoken. This might be the last chance. The last chance. If you were the cowboy riding into this town, what would be the very first thing you'd do? Part 1. Finding Hope. The first wind of morning slipped through the cracks, carrying the scent of wet grass and last night's cooled ash. In the wooden kitchen of Double H Ranch, the early light hadn't climbed high yet. It threaded in like a thin gold scarf, laying itself across a table scored with old knife marks and a black gleaming cast iron stove. Olivia paused for a heartbeat, her hands folded as if steadying her own heart. Water had just begun to tremble in the kettle, and the coarse ground coffee, hanging in a cloth bag by the window, stirred a small ache in her chest. A strange yet warming smell, unlike the black tea in Boston, where everything kept time-obeyed rules. and bowed to someone's hard stare. She raised the wick, sending off a few bright sparks. The stove crackled. Pine burned with a soft hiss. Olivia opened a cupboard and found a flour sack, a jar of salt, a paper-wrapped brick of butter with frayed corners. Biscuits. She whispered a voice so small only she could hear it. Awkwardly, she measured flour with a tin cup, tipped it into a bowl, added a pinch of salt, a little baking powder butter, cut in cubes, cold as winter memories, then pinched and rubbed with her fingertips. Each motion was a rung on the ladder out of fear, yet inside, she still braced for a shouted order from the past. She waited for something heavy to slam down. She waited, and heard nothing but wind slipping over the roof and the hens greeting the dawn. She floured the table, turned out the dough, fold press, turn, fold, press, turn. The rhythm matched the slow breathing of the prairie outside. Through the window, her gaze brushed the east fence line posts, casting bars across the dew-wet field, a gray horse blowing a pale cloud of breath. At the well, the bucket rocked lightly. Everything held so still, it felt like a prayer. Olivia lifted a round cutter, stamped out the dough, set each circle on a sheet pan, brushed a thin coat of milk across the tops. She turned to the coffee pot, scooped grounds into the cloth filter, poured hot water steam, rose sharp in her nose and warm behind her eyes. On the hook by the door hung a faded checkered apron, waiting for someone to tie it on and believe they belonged here. She hesitated, then took it down and looped it around her waist, nodding clumsily, like a child learning to tie her first shoes. The apron string drew snug a small kind of holding enough to help her stand. The oven sighed. The biscuits began to swell. Olivia lifted the cast iron skillet and laid in a few slices of salt pork. The fat hissed like distant rain. She tipped the pan carefully so the oil wouldn't spit, feeling her own nerves ripple in the heat. In Boston, the pan had been snatched from her hands, and she'd been scorned for not even making a decent breakfast. Here, she didn't know if this breakfast would be decent, but the flame was in her hands, and no other hand would wrench it away. Coffee, salt, pork, baking dough, the smells braided together like a wordless song opening the day. She stood straight, smoothed the apron seam, and looked through the fogged window at the long green of the pasture. In the western quiet, Olivia felt small but real, unsteady but alive. A horse huffed softly in the yard. She swallowed. The man would be coming in. And for the first time, she wanted to believe the smell of baking could be a safe hello. Spurs click-tack, tack, along the porch steps, then stopped at the door, like the end of a sentence. Elijah Hastings brushed a streak of red dust from his glove, set his wide-brimmed hat on a wooden peg, and slowly unbuckled his spurs, deliberate motions that spoke in silence of a man who would not storm into anyone's life. He paused at the threshold, letting the sun-cured leather and wild grass on his coat unwind into the warm room. His eyes took in the scene, the glow inside the stove, the steaming coffee pot, a tray of biscuits blistering on top, and a woman gripping the skillet's handle the way one grips courage. Elijah didn't say, "Do you know what you're doing?" He didn't ask, "Why don't you do it this way?" He only dipped his chin in a greeting, his voice low mourning. Then he stepped once more and stopped, leaving just enough air between them to breathe. "I'll wash up at the well," he said, lifting the water jug from the sill and setting a neatly folded clean towel on the table. A tiny detail, but Olivia noticed he turned the towel so its open edge faced her trembling hand, an invitation, not a demand. When he came back, he pulled out a chair, but didn't sit standing at an angle to look through the window. Winds shifted. Might be rain over the North Range by evening, he said, as if making conversation with the pasture, then fell quiet. His eyes, April sky blue, rested at the bridge of Olivia's nose for a count, then moved on, careful not to stare long, careful not to make her feel examined. On the floor, Buddy the dark-coated dog circled and lay down a little distance from the stove chin on his paws, blinking as if he too understood this business of keeping space. Olivia tipped the skillet. The pork browned to a glossy, nutty sheen. She picked up the ladle, cleared her throat. "I have eggs, if you want." "I do." Elijah answered one clean word, neither warm nor cold. He stepped close enough to reach the cupboard for plates, but stayed just outside the circle of heat, handing her the dish. With his left hand, his right resting lightly on the table's edge, careful not to crowd. Bits of grass clung to his sleeve. The clean sweat of work mixed with the wind, and the kitchen felt more like a front porch than a place where anyone had to try to be right. Olivia cracked an egg on the rim, slipped the yolk into the hot fat. The sizzle made her flinch, just a small jolt, but enough for Elijah to notice. He leaned in, slowly, took the wooden tongs, steadied the edge of the pan so it wouldn't slide. "No hurry." He said the same voice one might use with a green-broke colt breathe first. She nodded, eyes stinging not from smoke. Far off, the morning train called from town, thin distant like a thread, pulling the pass close and letting it go. Elijah set a small milk jar on the table, mumbling. Abigail said, "You like milk in your coffee." Olivia turned, surprised that the other woman had guessed something so small. "Thank you," she whispered, voice soft as mist. He answered with an filling a tin cup and easing it toward her. Between them, the old wooden table became a small bridge enough for a day to begin on the footing of peace. As Olivia lifted a plate, the fat popped, flashing a little tongue of flame, no danger more, a stove's quick sneeze. But she recoiled, hand rising to shield her cheek. A reflex taught by fear. The kitchen sagged. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Elijah stayed still for exactly one beat, only one. Then very slowly turned the knob down, pulled the skillet to the side, set on a lid. No questions, no clumsy, no "you've ruined it." Only the faint touch of metal against iron, then quiet. "It's all right," he said, not looking straight into eyes filling with tears, but at the flame drawing itself smaller, as if what needed calming was the fire. "Cast iron holds heat. Let me shift the pan." With a mitt, he lifted the handle and moved the skillet to the back burner, the smooth motion of a man who had lived his life among fire and steel. Olivia stood very straight, like someone struck by the sound rather than the burn, and tried to breathe past the trip hammer of her heart. "Sorry," she murmured, a word sliding out of habit, not fault. Elijah shook his head. "Set the tongs back, exactly where they'd been. No one nitpicks the stove here," he said slowly. "A kitchen's for warming folks first." He slid his chair back by half a hand span, as if making room for her trembling to settle. On the table, he turned the plate so the knife handle faced Olivia blade, turned inward, an invisible lesson in safety. No fuss, no show. only the habit of someone who learned through loss not to make anyone more afraid. In the corner, Buddy lifted his head, padded over, touched his cool nose to the fold of Olivia's apron, then lay down, sighing as if he could sigh with her. Olivia reached, then paused. Halfway was she allowed. Elijah saw the suspended hand. He let out a soft whistle. Buddy wagged. "His name's Buddy," he said. "Prefers carrots to bones." A nothing of a detail, but sometimes the nothings keep a person from going under. Olivia drew a breath. "I will get used to it," she said, not sure whether she meant the stove or the new life. "Take it slow," Elijah answered, topping off the coffee. "The West doesn't rush anyone. It only asks if you can keep." He lifted his cup and tapped it lightly to hers. Not a toast, but a quiet confirmation two people were sharing the same morning. Outside, the sun rose to the rim of the snowcaps. Light poured through the window slats, laying stripes of shadow and shine across the kitchen. On the stove, the flame kept its place under the lidded pan. Inside, Olivia, something else settled too, the expected shout that never came. The search for a safe spot, finally touching a shoulder that didn't have to touch her. He handled fire and handled her the same way, ease it over, lower the heat so no one gets burned. The emotional new moon here isn't an explosion. It's the slow hand leaving her cheek, realizing the other hands will not come down. They carried breakfast to the porch. The sky was clear, the clouds thin as paper smoke, the pasture lifting itself into the gentler sun. Elijah set 2 plates on the plank table legs over salt pork biscuits split at the top like little hills. The scent of butter twined with the note of honey he'd brought from the stores, a jar from last season, amber bright in an old glass. "Honey from the strip near the creek," he said, loosening the lid. The sweet warmth rose and made the whole porch feel sunnier. Olivia broke a biscuit. The heat and butter mist stung her eyes and made her lids soften shut. She poured honey, slow thick, touching the crumb and soaking down like water finding the seams of the earth. She bit. It cracked gently, then softened, then warmed. A simple taste that all at once pinched her throat because somewhere in memory, flour and honey had once been a rare reward from a brief childhood. Elijah ate slowly, each bite steady as the way he led a horse over gravel. He didn't say, "It's good," with big words. He said it by lifting his eyes to hers and giving one small nod. Then he set down his knife, and Fork wiped his hands on the towel and closed his eyes a heartbeat as if to keep the moment. "Good." He said one spare word, but it landed like a full blessing, like a bolt slipped into place, like a name called right. In the distance, a train whistle drew a long line across the sky, reminding them another world kept moving, bringing letters and strangers. Near the steps, the hens tiptoed around the trough. Buddy lay on his side to let the sun warm his belly tail, thumping lightly against the porch boards. Elijah wiped the rim of his tin cup and spoke as if to the empty chair beside him. "Out here, everybody's got their work. If you want, the kitchen can be yours." He paused, gaze drifting to the pasture. "But it's not an obligation, only if you want it." Olivia turned a bare finger, hunting a ring. No, not a ring. Habit reached for something that wasn't there. Her finger touched the apron. "I do," she said. And for her, it wasn't just about breakfast. She poured more milk into her coffee, a small gesture that felt calm. "Anything I can do," she added, "to make this place a little less quiet." Elijah looked at her. the way a man looks after many seasons, grateful that a voice has come back at the right time. Silence can heal. He answered, the corner of his mouth lifting. But I take your meaning. He propped an elbow and pointed toward the northern sky. See there the edges of the clouds, like sheep's wool. Might rain this afternoon, but nothing hard. That sort of rain is good for grass. His talk never touched her past, never pressed on wounds. It taught her how to read the sky. Sometimes learning to read clouds is how you learn to trust again. Olivia slid the honey jar toward him. You keep it. Elijah shook his head and nudged it back, voice still, even yours. She drew the jar to her chest like a certificate for a new morning and felt her ribs loosen. The small emotional turning came when he said, good, and pushed the sweet toward her things. Other men had never done praise in a single word, give up the honey, ask for nothing in return. Over the pasture, a hawk traced a circle. Its shadow skimmed the grass like a brushstroke sketching a faint sign of approval on the opening day. After the meal, Elijah reached for the dishes, then paused to look at Olivia's hands. Leave those. I'll be at the barn. Do whatever feels right to you. He set his hat, buckled his spurs again. The soft tack, tapped across the boards. In the yard, he stopped half a beat, tipped the brim in a small salute, a gesture that seemed to lift the air on the porch. Then he went about his day, leading horses, checking fence lines, his voice low with the young ones at play. Olivia cleared the plates and washed them at the well, the water so cool it sang against her palms. Spray leapt into the sun and fell in tiny crystals the morning tucked into her hair. She stood the dishes on the rack and wiped the table with a coarse towel, simple work. But to her, it was the right of someone allowed to touch the things of a house and set them in their rightful place. When she hung the apron back, she found in the drawer by the stove a pair of soft leather gloves smaller than a man's. At the cuff, a single rough O had been stitched in black thread, no beauty to it, but plain as day. Beneath lay a scrap torn from an old notebook, the iron-nibbed ink gone dry. If they fit, keep them. She sat the gloves on her lap, fingers tracing the crooked seam. Something very fine inside her gave a sound, not a cry, not quite a laugh. The sound of an inner door pulling open. Someone had thought of her hands enough to stitch an initial. The stitches were clumsy. The thinking was right. Olivia slid her fingers, and the fit was like they'd been measured. The leather was smooth, the tan scent warm. She felt protected and still able to grasp hold lift. She stood and went to the door, pausing on the threshold to look out. Elijah stood in the stall, stroking the gray's neck, saying something low. His whole frame was a shape of patience. He didn't laugh loud, didn't fling his arms, didn't perform. He simply stood there, a strip of shore where little waves could come in. She tried a deep breath, like the one she'd taken in the kitchen grass horsewind, and the sentence, if they fit, keep them. The emotional wish this time came like a prayer under her breath. Let me stay. Not stay in this house. Stay inside, a look that doesn't judge, inside a rhythm that needs no hiding. Olivia stepped down the porch steps. Buddy bounded to her side tail quiet, as if asking, shall we? She didn't call Elijah's name. She knew Western men could hear with their backs. Elijah turned, not fast, not slow, and saw the gloves on her hands. He tipped his hat again, saluting as one does to someone who has found her place. No more words. None needed. Along the northern rim, clouds gathered just as he'd said. A cool gust threaded through touched the loose strands of Olivia's hair, and she smiled small, rare. Inside the kitchen, the amber honey jar sat on the shelf like the house's own small son. Breakfast was done. Fear did not vanish in an hour, but it stepped back. The next tasks would be dinner, then evening, and other mornings. She returned to the porch, set her hand on the doorframe carved with old knife nicks, and spoke softly to the wood. "I'll try to bake better tomorrow." At the barn, Elijah tightened a cinch and added a knot. He didn't hear that small promise, but the west, with its wind and wood and fire, heard. And as the day moved on between the rhythm of spurs and the coming rain, something tender took root in that kitchen hope in the shape of a pair of gloves that fit just right. Part 2. The final verdict. Night wind dropped from the northern ridge across the grassland, carrying the scent of rain and damp pine. After a long day mending fence and mucking stalls, Elijah built a round campfire in the backyard, where the old logs burned with a soft crackle like a needle tapping a knot of thread. Firelight washed over the front of the barn, drawing uneven bands of light and shadow like wood grain across the brow of a man who thinks too much. Beside the flames, a black coffee pot rested on the trivet, its heat breathing into the chill of dusk. Buddy sprawled at the edge of the glow ears, pricking whenever the grass rustled. Olivia sat across from him, holding both hands in her lap, as if holding a letter she wasn't ready to open. She'd hung her apron in the kitchen that afternoon, yet flour and honey still lingered in her hair. Mixed with pine smoke, the scent made her feel caught between two banks. One was the safe kitchen that had produced breakfast. The other, the past a dark ravine just beyond the gate. Elijah asked nothing. He drew the pot from the coals, poured into 2 tin cups, and slid one toward her. His calloused fingers touched the handle for a beat, then moved on like an old horse passing a watering hole without trampling anyone's tracks. Overhead, the early summer sky scattered stars among thin, ash-like clouds. From very far off, a night train blew a long, low call that tangled with a coyote's cry, as if a taut line were pulling distant cities close to a ranch fire. Olivia stared into her cup. A thin sheen of coffee oil shivered with the wind. She knew if she didn't speak tonight, the words would turn to stone in her throat. She spoke very softly, as if speaking to her own breath. "In Boston, my door was always shut, but I was never safe." Elijah didn't move, only tilted his head a little. The fire brushed a bronze streak along his cheekbone, giving his eyes the color of heated metal. "I'll speak slow," Olivia went on, "because speaking fast makes me choke." Her knees trembled. She lifted the cup. The plain, bitter smell of coffee prodded her courage. "If there's any part you don't want to hear," she said, "you can tell me to stop." Elijah shook his head, a slow shake like a cypress, before the wind, his hand open on his knee to let the air pass through. In the West, folks rarely swear oaths, but the way he sat there was an oath. Olivia glanced past him toward the stall, where Tempest's eye caught a flicker each time the fire popped. She thought of the children at the station the night she arrived, clinging to the railings to watch the wagons pull in. She thought of the spur clicks on the saloon porch that she'd heard that first time, an omen of another life. "I don't know how to tell it neatly," she whispered, "but I think it's time." Elijah nodded, and between them, the fire seemed to draw in a little, as if saving warmth for something about to be brought to trial, the memories of a young woman. My house, Olivia began, had a marble hallway, beautiful and cold, like rain on a gravestone. She let out a papery, self-mocking laugh. They laid thick carpets and hung heavy drapes so footsteps wouldn't echo. But my stepfather's cane never stopped. Every day that dry tap on the floor tack, like a judge's gavel pronouncing sentence without a court. She set her cup on the ground and laced her fingers. His friends, men who knew how to use a knife and fork and knew how to use their dining words like knives. They said, order, discipline, what's good for you. No one said kindness. The only kind thing in that house was the dog. It could smell me shaking when someone stepped on the stairs. Elijah raised his cup, letting the coffee's warmth lay itself like a wool blanket over the story. He watched the flames as if the fire were the only interpreter needed between them. Olivia's words didn't stumble, but each one felt lifted from a stone inside her. They arranged for me to marry, she said. A man polite enough to fill a banquet, who told me I needed to learn obedience. I did learn by ways the mirror in my room didn't want to remember. And each time I looked into it, I thought maybe I'm already ruined. She pressed her lips together and exhaled through closed teeth. Then one day, I read a notice from a man out west seeking a wife short and plain. He said he needed someone who could read, write, keep a home and love. Firelight flickered in her eyes like 2 new minted coins. He wrote me letters, each word clean, like a street freshly swept. I thought maybe the far bank is ground you can stand on. Elijah didn't ask the man's name. He'd known it since the day he brought her home. He didn't ask, why didn't you stay and fight? The West teaches a person that question is for many its own kind of harm. The night I left, Olivia said I carried a bag of clothes, a little of my mother's money, and an old silk scarf. I walked to the station. The rain sprinkled the way, salt stings your hands. When the wagon jolted, pain streaked my chest and climbed my ribs like someone tightened a strap. She lifted her gaze, no longer tied to the flames, and looked out over the dark field. I came here with a dry mouth and a bruised heart. And he, the man who wrote, was gone. The one who met me was you. Elijah breathed out the breath of someone who sleeps under the open sky more than under a roof. He said one small word to mark the part of her story he was allowed to touch. Buddy's ears twitched toward his master, then settled. Olivia swallowed, like pushing a stone down her throat. The first days I thought I'd carried the old house in my blood, she said. Doors shut, and I still heard the cane. The stove was warm, and I still feared the spatter. You know, back there, I never once ate a biscuit I baked myself. She smiled the thinnest curve. This morning, I did. Elijah set his cup down and rubbed his hands together like a horseman softening an old rein. Tonight, he said gently, you can keep talking or stop. Both are fine. From him, the word fine sounded like a travel pass. Olivia nodded, and the fear of being cut off, the worst fear of anyone long overruled, backed away a step. Olivia opened her mouth, and not words but breath came first, the breath with the metallic taste of memory. I'm sorry, she said before she could say what mattered. Elijah shook his head. His mouth didn't move. This isn't a court, he said. The sentence brushed her skin like a warm hand set on a cold hand. She nodded, and the trapped words slipped through unsteady on their feet. I thought I deserved it. I thought if I obeyed better, then nothing else would break. A single tear fell hot onto the knuckles folded like prayer. Under the firelight, it turned almost black. Elijah didn't rush. He leaned forward just enough, like a cowboy easing a shoulder for a skittish colt to smell. Olivia, he said her name for the first time that night, full and steady, not Miss Polite or Mrs. Hastings to be. Simply Olivia. Her name flew through the yard like a bird finding its own nest. She cried, not a wail, but the sound of water moving through a crevice that finally has a path. Her shoulders shook lightly. Each tremor broke loose a little block of frozen time. Elijah reached slowly, giving her eyes time to see. That hand had held reins, hefted hay bales, hauled barn doors in a storm. Now it did the smallest job, lay over her clenched fingers. No pulling, no leading, just resting there so her hand had a flat plane to set itself down upon. Out here, he said, still looking at the fire we call each other by our names. The silence thickened, then thinned like fog. Buddy rose, circled, and lay closer against Olivia's feet, breathing even belly, rising and falling to the fire's rhythm. I don't want to tell the details, Olivia said through the blur. I won't give the ones who taught me fear more space on my mouth tonight. Elijah nodded. That was testimony enough, no court needs more. But there was a time I thought about disappearing. She went on, her voice suddenly straight, like a line pulled clean from a snarl. Not going somewhere else. Vanishing from the world. Because if I went, they'd stop calling me burden, trouble, disobedient. I stood by a window and thought, if I fall, will anyone hear? Her tears dried in her throat into a laugh that wasn't a laugh. Tonight I sat by your fire, and I thought if I fall, you would hear. Not to ask why, only to say, all right, then sit here. Elijah squeezed her hand, his first true squeeze. Just enough for the pulse in her wrist to know it still beat, for the bones to know they hadn't come apart. He still didn't stare into the pain. He watched the flames, where every night a log cries out when the fire finds its heart. Tomorrow, he said, I've got to ride the north boundary and check the fence line. If you want to come, I've got an old soft saddle. Grass smells good after rain. Nothing he said was moral advice. It was a map for a sunlit day. People aren't led out of the woods by argument, but by a road with footprints. The wind shifted curling smoke back so it clung to Olivia's cheek. She brushed her hair aside and realized her hand was still in his, like a bird not ready to leave a new branch. Am I at fault? She asked a childlike question that made the fire draw in. Elijah exhaled longer than before. On a ranch, he said, when a horse spooks it, kicks the stall boards. Paint flakes off, but nobody blames the horse for being scared. We clean up and stand with it till its heart beats like the prairie again. Fear isn't a crime. Hitting someone who's afraid is. Plain words that go into the bone. But I stayed too long, Olivia whispered. There are roads, Elijah answered, that turn to mud and slow you down. Dry season comes. People go far. No one tallies sins by the season. He leaned, pinched up a dry stick, and nudged it into the fire's heart, so it would burn even. Once he added, Tempest spooked at his own shadow. He spun himself tired. I led him into the sunlight, showed him the sunlight turns every shadow into a margin. Folks are like that too. Olivia smiled through tears. A small field opened in her chest. You don't talk much, she said, but you talk right. I'm not good at talking, Elijah replied. I'm good at being nearby. He let go of her hand only long enough to refill the coffee, then set the cup back closer this time. Those repeated motions, like a quiet ritual, gave her trembling a place to go. Tomorrow, she said, I want to learn to ride. I want to learn to read clouds like you. Reading clouds? Elijah nodded, is easier than reading people. But it'll tell you when rain's coming and when it's time to head inside. They fell silent for a while, listening to grass rub against itself, to the horses breathing in their stalls, to Buddy's paws stretch and fold. The poorest thing Olivia said is that in the old house, I was never called by my name, as if it belonged to me. Elijah tilted his head. He didn't say, I'm sorry for that. In the West, a man doesn't apologize for what he didn't do. He did something else, Olivia, he said again. Just that, testing her name to see if it could stand steady on hard ground. This time, she didn't cry. She answered very softly, yes, Elijah. She tried his name in return, tasting the West's wind in it. He smiled, a rare sound like horseshoes skimming smooth gravel. The fire dropped low, leaving coals. Elijah sat on another log, unrushed. He didn't want the night to end like a trial. He wanted it to pass, like a quiet watch, someone awake, someone weeping, and morning arriving as proof that both were still here. In the glow, the O-stitch gloves on Olivia's knee threw a small shadow like a red seal on a sworn statement just signed. One more thing Olivia said when the coals were dimming. I've been carrying a handkerchief with an H embroidered on it from the man who meant to marry me. I don't know why I kept it. Maybe people who've been afraid a long time need a token to remind them fear was real. But if I keep it, I'll have no room to keep anything else. She reached into her skirt pocket and drew out a small folded square. The stitching straight here, crooked there. The thread darkened with time. Elijah didn't reach to take it. He pushed the fire stick toward her, passing her the right to command the flames. Olivia speared the handkerchief on the tip and held it to the fire the way you hold out a letter to be read. The cloth caught slow, then flared. The H shrank into a shape with no meaning, and the ash lifted, threading itself into the old coffee smell. When the last filament curled into cinder, Olivia exhaled a long breath, like finishing the reading of an indictment. Elijah didn't say good job. He said, done. The word dropped to the ground, soft as a new blade of grass. The final verdict, Olivia mouthed, is that I'm not guilty for wanting to live. She feared it might sound proud, but when it left her, it felt like a gentle truth anyone could nod to. Elijah nodded. Out here, he said, nobody makes you prove your right to breathe. He lifted his coat from the back of the chair and set it over her shoulders, not as a substitute for anything, but like a wish for a good night's rest. Wearing a cowboy's coat means you're in the house. From the fields, a faint pale began to finger the rim of the sky. It wasn't dawn yet, only the handprint of dawn laid down early. But it was enough to make the hens stir and Tempest tap a light hoof in his stall. Buddy stood, stretched long-arched, and yawned the yawn of a belly that trusts tomorrow's meal. Olivia pulled the coat close at her throat and caught the sense of wind, old leather, and a little leftover noon sun layers of smell stacked into a single sentence. Here. Tomorrow. You'll teach me to read clouds, she reminded him. Elijah said. And to knot the fence ties, so a storm can't pull 'em loose. And to make biscuits that don't bake up dry, she smiled. That one, he shrugged. I'll learn from you. They looked at each other. No need for big words. In that look, the last court, the small one she'd built inside herself, to try her own soul gavelled shut. The board that read adjourned came down for good. Not because a judge pardoned her, because she turned back toward life. When they rose to bank the fire, Elijah ground the edges with his boot heel, then used the stick to break the coals apart so they'd cool. Even the habit of a man who knows that fire like a story, if not ended carefully, can smolder back into dry straw. Olivia waited until the final ribbon of smoke thinned into the breeze. She picked up the stick and planted it in a clod of damp earth, like setting a flag on a new shore. Thank you, she said, unsure whether she meant the fire, the night, or the man before her. Elijah settled his hat and tipped the brim in the Western way, not greeting a stranger, but recognizing someone who belongs. Sleep, he said. We ride early. Yes, Olivia answered. She turned and stepped over the threshold toward the kitchen, where the honey jar waited like the house's private son, where the O-gloves hung on the peg. Behind her, the soft tack of spurs paced the porch with Elijah, then fell still as he stopped before the barn door, a night watch taking his post. Overhead, more than one cluster of stars had gone dim, making room for the new light. The night ended with smoke in her hair and coffee on her tongue. And in the quiet of the brick-paved yard, a verdict was given. No gavel, no paperwork, only one hand, holding another silent pardon, the only weight heavy enough to snap the cord called fear. At Double H Ranch, dawn never asks anyone's past. It only asks, how do you want to live today? Part 3. Inner Turning. At first light, the pasture was soaked with dew, like a face just washed. Under a milk-pale sky, 2 horses circled the yard. Daisy the gray sprinkled with salt across her back, dark of mane, and Rowdy, hot chestnut, slicing the morning like an arrow. Buddy ran the fence line with a pink lolling tongue. Every time Elijah whistled, the dog glanced back, tail sketching commas into the day. Spurs click-tack, tack, across the porch. The leather of a saddle thumped softly against a horse's belly, those low familiar notes, and the scent of horse sweat tangled with last night's dried sage warming the yard like a blanket thrown over the new day. Olivia stepped out, wearing the O-stitched gloves hair tucked beneath a small checked scarf. Beneath her sleeve, old marks showed faint, but no longer pulled tight. Elijah set the old saddle on Daisy and turned to her. Cloud reading today. On the northern rim, the clouds bunched thick their frayed edges like wool. Late rain, he said, but the south wind's warm, won't be mean. She nodded, studying the sky as if learning a fresh alphabet. Big clouds are shade. Olivia ventured eyes bright with a teasing spark. But the speckled edges mean the light's still breathing. Elijah smiled rare, which pleated a fine line at the corner of his eye. You can read. He laced his hands together, thumbs crossed, making a step for a beginner to borrow. Up you go. Olivia set her toe in his hold, gripped Daisy's mane, and rose. This time, her body didn't shake like before. Daisy blew a warm breath and flicked an ear as if agreeing. Elijah stood at the left shoulder, hand light on the mare's neck. Loosen your shoulders. Let the wind do the rest. Olivia adjusted a knee, awkward and curious at once. Buddy shot forward, circling like a latch about to lift. Elijah took the lead rope and walked them round the yard. Spurs tapped stone in an easy rhythm, no forcing. After a dozen laps, Elijah let the lead slack and slid half a step back. Olivia startled. Daisy pulled a bigger breath. "I'm still here," Elijah said, keeping his hand where she could see it. "Just letting the grass speak first." Olivia pressed her lips and gathered the reins. Daisy listened. The circle opened to an oval, then curved toward the eastern fence. Wind lifted her face. The early sun stung her eyes, and her heart suddenly remembered how to sigh like a window finally unjammed after years stuck fast. By the cottonwood shade, Elijah jogged across her path and raised a hand. Olivia checked the reins. Daisy eased. The red dust settled like powder. Elijah touched the edge of her boot, a quick, encouraging tap. Good. One word fell to the ground and rang a long time. Olivia swallowed the sentence prickling behind her teeth. "I'm not riding fear anymore. I'm riding a real horse." Perhaps it didn't need saying. The wind knew. Buddy knew. And Elijah's steady, unasking eyes knew. The emotional new moon brightened not with applause, but with the even breath of three beings: a cowboy, a young woman, and a gentle horse, learning together to walk straight into morning without peeking back at a locked door. After breakfast, they led the horses along the north fence. Dew beads shone on the barbed wire. The brake gaped like an open mouth in a sentence cut short. Elijah wore his tool belt pliers, U-nails a coil of fresh wire. Olivia carried the wooden mallet O-gloves on. Buddy slipped through the gap now and then like a child testing limits. "Watch the snap," Elijah warned. "Don't over-tighten." He clamped the splice with the pliers. Olivia braced the post. Wind threaded through. The wire sang like strings dared too tight. Back then, Olivia said eyes on the join things snapped in that house, and no one mended them. She tried a smile, but her mouth trembled. "Here, if it breaks, we fix it," Elijah answered, as calm as the weather. "Not 'cause fence matters more than people, because people need fences to keep the wind off." He angled his shoulders, stepped back a touch. The wire ping-tung and nearly kissed her wrist. Elijah shifted and caught the line, the splice settling home. There he nodded. Strong enough. Too tight and it'll shear. Olivia looked at the fresh, twisted line and saw life coils needing just the right hand. Too much force it fractures, too little it slips. "I thought I was weak," she said, watching the U-nail seat. "Turns out, I was just pulled too tight." The mallet beat in an even rhythm, each strike one heartbeat. Elijah said. "Grass has its soft season too." He set down the pliers and passed her a cloth. "You're not weak. You're taking wind from two directions." They moved down the fence. A calf separated from its mother had trapped its leg in thorn near a dry wash. Its calling fluttered like a leaf trying to breathe. Elijah swung down. "Easy," he murmured, eyes lowering, hands slow. "Hold its head," he told Olivia, passing her a soft line. She knelt. Buddy flattened himself to keep from startling the little one. "Hey now," she whispered. "We'll get you out." She reached through the thorns. A small tear opened on her glove. A bead of blood rose, but her hand didn't withdraw. Elijah clipped a few strands. The calf lurched free, shivered steadied, then bounded toward the herd. Its mother bawled from afar, and two dark muzzles stitched together again across the grass. Elijah noticed the rip in her glove and half opened his mouth. Olivia lifted her hand first. "Don't," she said, smiling the first true smile of the day. "I can stitch it." The words fell onto the prairie like seed, meeting the exact rain it needed. Elijah went quiet, then said very slowly, He swallowed and straightened it. "There's beeswax thread on the pantry shelf. Abigail keeps it." Olivia nodded and set two fingers over the tear as if touching an older fracture. Some rips deserve to be remembered for what they saved. Between the breath of wind and grass, Elijah offered a piece of himself he'd never said aloud. "I had someone once. Name: Rebecca. Winter lasted longer than the person did. He didn't add anything. Olivia didn't ask how she'd gone. She stepped a half step closer, so the newly joined fence had a shoulder to lean against. They didn't look at each other, but another line, no barbs, no wire, twisted itself from silence and regard. By noon, the clouds pulled a heavy quilt across the sky. The blackened edge ate up the silver. Under the cottonwood, Elijah said, "Rain'll pass over and be done." The cottonwood was a green ceiling. They tied the horses to a root that humped from the earth. Buddy pressed against the hem of Olivia's skirt chin on her boot. Rain came hard, an undone wall tumbling across the grass. The dirt opened its scent. The sweet of crushed blades rose. Wet leather and damp wool from Elijah's coat now draped over her shoulders, mixed into a perfume cities can't keep. Elijah drew a small bundle from his pocket, leftover biscuits, and a tiny glass jar of honey. "Brought it from breakfast," he said, splitting a biscuit and pouring the honey, sliding the larger share to her. Olivia frowned. "You're loading your side. I'm used to it." They ate under the rain's drum. Honey ran into her knuckles. She licked without thinking and laughed, remembering that first morning. Elijah watched, mouth tilting. Northfield honey wins every court in the land. A clumsy joke, true enough to make the storm feel lighter. "When I was a kid," Elijah said, "after a stretch of quiet, my father taught me a bowline the loop that never cinches a throat. He loosened a soft rope and tied it slowly in front of her, holding each step long enough for her eyes to learn. It's for saving, not for catching." He set the line in her hands. The hemp felt like a plain-spoken truth, warm with rain. Olivia copied, fumbled, fixed, tried again, and finally the knot lay neat. "Doesn't tighten," she breathed, tugging. "Doesn't tighten," he agreed. The rain thinned. Far off, the rail line winked with puddles like a silver snake sleeping. Olivia leaned back against the tree head, tipped to watch the last drops sift through the leaves. "I keep a journal," she said in a secret, quiet voice. "Not to remember, but to tell myself this day happened." Elijah turned the honey jar between thumb and finger and listened to the tiny clink of glass in his pocket. "I stamped days by a horse's breath, and a full plate," he said. He hesitated, touching a slick stone. Olivia waited. "I write poorly," he admitted, "but if you'd like, I'll show you the ranch ledger. I know the numbers. You know the order. Let me try." Olivia said, eyes lighting with a different joy, the joy of arranging, of naming, of setting things back in their right drawers. "Give me a mess, and I'll return it home." The turning came as tidy as a bowline drawn closed, one person asking to be tied, not to choke, but to stay. The rain quit completely. Buddy stood and stretched and touched his nose to the back of her hand, licking the stripe of honey she'd missed. She laughed and tapped his brow. Cheater. Elijah watched the moment like a photograph developing in sunlight, slow, sharp, and scentless of fear. By afternoon, back home, Olivia sat at the long kitchen table with a worn leather notebook, loose handwritten slips, and a few receipts from Marjorie Wilson's store. Elijah leaned in the doorway with a tin of water, watching her sort into columns seed salt, ewe-nails, lamp oil, flower rope. For each item, she left a spare half page to note weather and movement, so the ledger sprouted new headings: east wind horses sluggish, late rain grass aromatic, strong bees, honey good. Ledger of the wind, Elijah said, eyes smiling. Ledger of a house, Olivia corrected. Every house has weather. Abigail stopped by and set a bundle of pumpkin starts on the table. South Bank's warmer, she said, measuring distances with her eyes. Elijah took a hoe. Olivia rolled up her sleeves. Buddy helped by digging too deep and showering her apron with dirt. She laughed to shoot him off, then called him back. They hoed straight rows, dropped seeds, pulled soil over, and watered lightly. The fresh smell of earth rose like something unbuckling in the chest. At sundown's flattening light, Olivia hung a second saddle hook Elijah had just mounted in the kitchen alcove. The nail bit the wood with a warm thunk. "For your saddle?" He said small words that pushed the wall inside her back another stride. She set Daisy's saddle on it. The faint horse sweat clung. The hook held fast. A home had gained one more place to return to. Elijah set a granary key on the table. "Right here. Use it when you need to," he said, still looking toward the window. The habit of a man who doesn't press his eyes on anyone when handing over authority. Olivia touched the key. The metal was cold, then warmed in her palm, as if it had just walked out of his pocket. "I won't waste," she said. At Double H Ranch, waste is the only sin worth worrying about, Elijah half joked. But you're not the type. When the last hill drank its share of water, Elijah tipped a can so the stream fell in one thin line. "I still wait to hear someone call me home." Each night, he said lightly, like a weather report from his heart. Olivia leaned her head. "I'll call if you want." The breeze brushed their cheeks. The damp pumpkin smell and the first kitchen smoke wrapped them like a large shawl. "Don't," he corrected gently. "Call when you want. That's what makes it home." The little turning clicked like a key, turning true. Not a forced pledge, but a real invitation. Night came. A lamp in a glass cage burned steady the yellow flame, an eye keeping watch. From the far pasture came a cow calling her calf. Crickets stitched the dark with thread-fine sound. Elijah sat on the steps, boots braced on the lower tread spurs, still hat beside him like a friend asleep. Olivia brought 2 mugs of hot chocolate Abigail's secret hoard on the top shelf for long days that want sweet. Elijah sipped, eyes lowering, shoulders unhooking. Sweet, he said, a rare word for him, like June rain. Buddy lay across the doorway, like a soft gate. In the stall, Daisy tapped twice enough to say she was content with the day. Olivia leaned against the porch post and looked toward the mended fence. The wire drew one fine, bright line. "When the wire snapped, I thought it would catch me in the face," she admitted. "I stayed. I didn't run." Elijah didn't clap. He bent, picked up a weathered scrap of wood, and with a small knife scored a single notch. "A day worth marking," he said. You keep the books. I cut the posts. On the porch beam beside older faded cuts, a new short stroke shone. The West's music needs no fiddle. It's the creak of boards under shifting weight, the key change of wind across a roof edge, the hush of cloth against wood. Elijah rose and held out a hand, an invitation. Walk a turn. Olivia set down her cup and placed her hand in his. They moved slowly along the porch, like a waltz, without music. Step, draw, change, turn. Spurs ticked the boards. Tack, tack. Her skirt brushed his chaps. Buddy lifted his head and huffed as if laughing. Elijah raised their joined hands so she could spin beneath his elbow. The brim of his hat cast a slice of shade across her hair. The lamp painted a ring of light at her heel. "Are you ever afraid?" Olivia asked when they paused by the last step. Elijah looked out across the field, voice low and level as fire. "Yes. On nights when the train cries, I fear I'll be that man again, the one no one calls by name." He turned to her gaze, steady but not pressing. "Tonight, I heard someone call me by hanging a second saddle on a second hook." Something unfamiliar tugged in Olivia's chest. Not a tremor, but an answer, stepping from its shell. "I am still lonely," she said plainly, "but I'm not alone." Dry tears shone only lamplight touching wet lashes. Elijah set two fingers at the back of her collar and smoothed a small wrinkle so ordinary a gesture it said what vows would try to say. "I'll keep you tidy against the wind." Tomorrow, he reminded, we try the bees, so the honey's sweeter than last year. So this year, you've got a reason to keep the jar in your kitchen. Awkward, earnest. Before going in, Elijah carved one more sign on the porch post. This time, 2 letters lightly overlapping, faint enough that only the household would know EO. Not a declaration, just a sign to guide anyone home late. This house holds 2 breaths. Olivia touched the small crest with one fingertip and pressed as if stamping it into her own heart. "From now on, if the wind changes, I won't hide in the cupboard. I'll step out on the porch." Elijah tipped his hat. "I'll stand between you and the wind." The chapter closed on near silent sounds, the inner latch settling Buddy, rolling to guard the threshold Daisy's long exhale, and the 2 cups resting upside down on the rack. In the kitchen, the amber honey threw a small square of light onto the wall, a little sun people keep for long nights. Outside, the sky went gentle, and at Double H Ranch, 2 people finished their primer lesson from Loneliness Step 1 to Speaking the Unsaid together. Part 4. Silent Witnesses. Evening folded over Double H Ranch the way someone might close a Bible softly without a sound. The last light slid across the fields in thin, honey-colored sheets. The wind carried dry sage and warm pine resin slipping over the porch boards with a faint singing squeak. Elijah tightened the final bowline on the north fence post. Then his spurs fell quiet, leaving the long music of the range, a cow calling her calf crickets, sewing their small seams, and sometimes the drawn-out whistle of a train drifting up from town. Buddy's ears pricked. He sniffed hard and sprinted toward the old cottonwood that leaned on the rise, where the grass grew greener roots, keeping the ground wet. Buddy, Elijah called, but the dog had already slipped through the fence and begun pawing at a low mound, careful as if digging up a secret. Olivia set down the basket of ewe-nails and wiped her brow with her sleeve. The slant of late light dusted her shoulders with gold. "Over there," she whispered. Elijah squinted. Beneath the cottonwood, lay a weathered wooden cross, set a little crooked, a frayed blue ribbon tied around it. "Our old place," Elijah said. Voice dropped to a hush, the way folks talk in church. "My parents rest there. We wanted to keep close." He walked slowly, took off his hat, and handed it to Olivia, an old Western habit when touching anything holy. Buddy scraped a few more strokes, then stopped, let out one small, satisfied sound, and flopped down as if his job were done. The earth had given up the corner of a small tin box, rust-bloomed, pushed up by rain through the grass. Olivia stilled. The tree's shadow wove bright and dark across her cheek. The O-stitched gloves wore a smear of brown. For a heartbeat, she heard her own pulse, the far-off knock of the noon fence post echoing back. No one said, "Leave it for tomorrow." Things the land brings to light out here are rarely accidents. Elijah sank to one knee and eased the dirt back with his knife handle, freeing the box. Likely rain slumped the ground. He said, eyes still on the cross. Ma kept odds and ends in old tobacco tins. When she passed, I set this by the cross instead of in the coffin. Didn't expect it to surface. He glanced to Olivia, asking whether she wanted to touch something that belonged to this home. Olivia nodded. She laid his hat on the grass and lifted the box with both palms, steady as if she were holding a child. Evening pooled in a bright stripe across the lid. A faded line of letters ghosted near the edge. "For the day we are not afraid." Olivia read it in her head. The lid fit tight, but the seam had loosened. Elijah offered his pocket knife edge, worn bright like fishbone, and with a gentle flick, the latch gave. A breath of beeswax and damp soil rose an old kindly smell. The small things inside quivered in the slant light, turning it candle-soft, small but trying. Folded linen, a tube of beeswax thread, a little silver thimble with a simple ring of dots, a green patina brass button, a yellowed scrap of paper. Elijah's breath hitched and held. "Ma's thimble," he said, the roundness of a sun in his voice. She was stitching the night before the fever came. She'd say, "Where the needle goes, the house follows." He chuckled once and let it fade, the sound falling into the quiet. When we buried her, I couldn't put it in the coffin. I set it in this box, close to earth and still ours. Olivia lifted the thimble. It was so light, she thought it might slip free. The inside bore vague smudges where fingers had been. She tried her pinky too small, her ring finger just right. The soft click of metal on skin sounded in her mind like a latch drawn gently home, not to lock someone in, but to keep the peace. A strange, tender image rose Boston on a deep night. Her mother, bending to fix a hem-black tee and beeswax thread faint in the air. Another hand keeping the wool from slipping off her lap and whispering, "Tomorrow, you'll be one day taller. Your dress won't pinch so much." Beside the thread lay the paper, written in iron-nibbed hand. "He maketh me to lie down in green pastures." Below a clumsy four-petal speedwell was sketched in pale ink. Ma copied scripture half right. Most times Elijah said a flicker of sun in his eyes. She'd stick speedwell in Abigail's hair and call it the poor man's green pasture. He drew breath and turned a little as if letting the wind dry the damp corners. Olivia traced the dotted band around the thimble, not fancy flowers, just small marks linked in a circle like many footsteps gathered into a path. In Boston, thimbles were things she wasn't allowed to touch, lest she spoil proper order. Here it fit, and instead of the old stab of pain, something else settled, like the quiet that arrives after dinner, when the house thins its sounds to make room for sleep. If it fits, keep it, Elijah said, borrowing his own words from the gloves. Use it. Tools are alive in the hands of the living. Olivia looked up. Under the cottonwood, the low sun warmed her eyes into two bright drops almost falling. I'm afraid if I wear it, your mother will be missing a hand, she admitted. Elijah shook his head in that plain Western way, few words, much meaning. My mother's still got her hands here, he said, touching the wooden cross. And if she were around, she'd scold us. Don't let good tools rust. His mouth tugged. Abigail would nag me if I gave it to the wrong person. Olivia glanced back into the box. The brass button carried two faint letters, E.W. Her breath caught. Edmund Walker, she murmured. Elijah paused. Likely she picked it up along the Walker fence, he said. He'd lose a button, hauling timber. She meant to return it and forgot. That noon, the winter storm rolled in. The name Edmund didn't chill the wind. If anything, it turned over in the soil and lay still. Olivia smoothed the scripture scrap again and spoke it aloud, not as a plea, but as an answer. He makes me lie down in green pastures. They cleared away the tangle of grass around the cross, straightened the faded blue ribbon, and replaced its knot with a bowline, a knot that holds without tightening. Elijah handed Olivia the rope. No choking, she said, tongue between her teeth in concentration. The bowline closed Nita a hug that knows when to stop. Buddy crouched, head-tipped eyes bright. Each time the thimble flashed on Olivia's hand, he pricked his ears as if he understood the weight of small things. May I leave something here? Olivia asked, eyes on the fresh mound. Elijah nodded. She untied the checked scarf she wore and ripped a slim strip, looping it below the ribbon, knotting it alongside the bowline. In the wind, the cloth flicked softly, not a sign of mourning, but a sign of breath. To remind us someone here is still breathing, she said. Elijah didn't polish her words. He left them as they were good Western grammar, light on ornament, rich in truth. Olivia sat on a raised root and opened her palm around the thimble. Boston returned, cold, sleek, shining. Men's shoes on marble, the smell of shoe polish. Gaslight pressed into walls. Oddly, none of it pierced her tonight. It just sat down like a tired guest finding a chair. I used to think I had to forget it all to be at peace, she said, watching a sparrow peck. But maybe. Peace is when memory has its own seat and doesn't throw me out of mine. Elijah planted his pocket knife upright in the dirt like a person rooting a dry twig. A place to sit, he echoed. Plenty of chairs here, porch step stall, threshold the cottonwood root. Memory chooses. We sit alongside. He slipped off the narrow leather strap he wore at work and set it on the tin lid, one small exhibit for the case he'd just made. My daddy used to say, the ground remembers everything. What must rise will rise. What must lie down will lie down. They fell quiet. Out on the prairie, a band of horses switched their tails. Dust lifted in the dying light like small columns of smoke. Buddy shifted and set his chin on Elijah's boots, breathing steady as a sewing machine dog breathed the low hum of a settled house. Olivia slid the thimble back on and mimed the stroke of smoothing a hem. Her finger seemed to remember. For the first time since the station, she pictured her mother not as a blade, but as a bowl of hot soup scented faintly with garlic. I'd like, she hesitated, tomorrow, to plant a strip of speedwell here. Your mother will have her green pasture." Elijah glanced at the ground and nodded. "That soil's warm," he judged like a man of seasons. "Evening sun sits right on it." The emotional turn came barely audible, the long exhale of someone who's finally chosen a seat for her memories, neither in a box nor on her back, but beside her, under the cottonwood, where the wind is gentle enough not to toss her hair. When the sun hung on the hill's rim, like a wide coin, Olivia opened the box once more. She set the EW button in her palm and looked as if at a face, a man who had stood between two worlds, Boston and the West. Edmund Walker, a name that when she first arrived felt like a thrown rope, then became a handful of ash because he was gone before she could knock. Now, the greened brass lay quiet, an eye without judgment. "He wrote so clean," she said softly. "If he'd lived, maybe I'd be on the far side of this fence." Elijah squared his hat-brim eyes on the last light. "He was a good man," he said simply. "He brought you here in the way the dead can." The sentence shifted the scent of the air from dry hay to well water. Olivia put the button back and let her fingers linger the one extra heartbeat courtesy demands. "Let's carry it to the Walker line," Elijah said. "Tomorrow I'll go with you. We'll tuck it into the crack of that fir by the grade where he used to stop. He'll know you came." Olivia nodded, and a small, pinned place inside her loosened as if a hidden clip had been undone. That picture, not a city grave with a tailored stone, but a knob of land where wind meets grass, felt right. "And when we come home," she added, "I'll bake honey biscuits. We'll set the tin on the porch tonight. Anyone walking under the stars will smell it." Elijah smiled a thin harvest sickle smile, gathering just enough of the day. "Out here," he said, "we use bread to say what a mouth can't say clean." He glanced at the porch beam where last night he'd scored a small mark. "I'll notch one for him," he murmured. "So when the stars come, somebody can read his name by scent." Buddy's ears sprang up as if the idea of writing with a nose made perfect sense. Olivia closed the tin, keeping the thimble. She offered it to Elijah with a look. He drew a slim hemp string from his pocket, fed it through, and tied a small loop. "Wear it," he said. "Keeps your hands free and keeps it from getting lost." The thimble lay against her sternum, cool for a beat, and then warm, the way worries behave chilly when they arrive, gentling as soon as they're given a place to live. In the dimming picture of evening, the thimble was a small point of light, never glaring just enough to steer by. "Thank you," Olivia said, "for something that wasn't mine and somehow fits me." Elijah gave a slow shake. "Belongs to this house," he said. "And you're helping make this house yours." The words felt like a silent vote cast into her keeping. She tucked it into her ledger of the heart and felt the balance of peace rise by one. They patted the soil around the cross and set the tin by the cottonwood's roots, not deep, so hands could find it, rain could speak to it, and earth could remember. Elijah drew his knife again and scratched 2 tiny letters on the wood, M.H. Mary Hastings. He didn't say the name aloud. He bowed his head. Olivia pressed the thimble hand to the mark, sealing it with the lightest touch. Along the rim of the sky, the first stars winked on silver tacks, turned by an unseen hand into the great dome. On the walk back, their tracks stretched into 2 long side-by-side lines. Buddy ran ahead and doubled back, nose dotting the ground as if writing words no one else could read. At the porch, Elijah hung his hat, unstrapped his spurs, and set them neat beside his boots. Tomorrow, he said the walker line. Evening for the speedwell. All right, Olivia answered. All right. Now sounded like a corner, folded just right in a linen napkin. No longer permission, but promise. In the kitchen, Olivia built a fire. Wet wood smoked, then turned to clear heat. She set the honey jar in the center of the table and brought out the bowl of flour. The thimble clicked softly against its string when she reached little metal notes, like the bells on a cow's collar in the yard, strange and homely, a house speaking in a language no one teaches. Elijah stood on the threshold and watched, rubbing his hands together at his midriff the way a man does when he's about to hear music. He didn't say, "I'm proud of you." He said, "Tonight don't dream gavels. Dream pasture." When the biscuits came out, Olivia broke one and ran honey over it. She stepped to the porch and set it down like an offering. For the man who wrote the letters, she murmured. Elijah stood beside her and scored a third small notch into the porch post. For the woman who stitched, he added, Buddy sat square at the top step, guarding his imaginary portion. In the stall, Daisy let out one long sigh, as if to stamp the day complete. Olivia went in and washed at the basin by the window. The water bit her fingers cold, then warmed. She looked up. In the pain, her face was blurred with steam, but it didn't flinch when someone passed behind her. The thimble glimmered like a star that had slipped into the kitchen by mistake. Tomorrow, she told the wooden wall, when I water the speedwell, I'll tell Ma about the western chairs. The wall kept the words in its grain to give back later tomorrow, or the day after, when the wind sifted through. Elijah lowered the lamps until only one remained. He touched Olivia's shoulder lightly, not to direct or correct, only to remind her that a person stood between her and the door. Sleep, he said. I'll watch until the wind turns. Yes, she smiled. She didn't ask how he'd know. By now, she did by the roof's voice, the harness creak, in the stall, the way Buddy shifts things, Western men read, the way city men read the news. Night pulled every sound into a single short sentence piece. On the porch, the honeyed biscuit sat like a thank you for a guide who didn't make it in time. Under the cottonwood, the tin breathed with the soil. And in the house, the silver thimble ceased to be cold. Silent witnesses, a wooden cross, a dog who knows how to dig a thimble that fits told the story in the truest Western way. Put peace in living hands, then hush. On Double H Ranch in a hard land, kindness is the roof. Tonight that roof came down without a hammer's blow. Part 5. Opening the door to justice. Late afternoon, settled like a cup of tea gone quiet. Sunlight slipped off the barn roof, leaving a rim of copper fire along the fields. Insects stitched a soft seam through the hour needle fine. Elijah was oiling the gate hinges when Buddy's ears shot up and a growl thrummed in his chest. Down the dirt road, red dust lifted in a ribbon, 2 riders taking shape inside it. 10 paces from the gate, the lead man checked his horse. A city felt hat through shade across a pair of cold eyes. A vest sleeve flashed a silver watch. He wore a harsh cologne that didn't belong to the West. It shoved the smells of grass and wet leather out of the air. Good afternoon, Elijah said, one hand on the gate bar, voice low and even. The stranger's mouth tilted. Name's Callum Briggs. Detective agency. I'm here under commission from Mr. Davis of Boston. looking for a woman named Olivia Thompson. Heard she's here." The name fell into the yard like a stone dropped down a well. Inside, at the kitchen door frame, Olivia froze, palm gripping the wood. The silver thimble at her throat tapped her sternum with a small click. Elijah didn't turn. He swung the gate open only halfway, leaving the crossbar like a line drawn. "You've got the wrong place," he said, watching the light in the stranger's horse's eye. Briggs pulled a handbill from his pocket. "Reward for information about a missing woman. The description sharp enough to make the breeze hold a breath. She owes a very serious sum," Briggs said, tapping the page like a gavel. "We're here to take her back." "Got a judge's warrant?" Elijah asked. Briggs smirked. "Don't need one. Civil matter. You hand her over. I cover your trouble." His thumb stroked the butt of a pistol holstered under his coat part, show part threat. Buddy slid half a step forward, a low snarl buzzing. Elijah laid 2 fingers on the dog's head, enough to say, "Wait. We don't hand over anyone without paper from the law. In the name of the Lord," Elijah said, voice no louder, 1 degree colder. He lifted the bar, not to open wider, but to set it firmer. "If you think you've got the right, come to town. Sheriff Taylor knows how to read the law. Tomorrow, Mrs. Olivia and I will be in his office. The door to justice opens there, not at my gate." Olivia drew a long breath. That familiar, metallic taste of fear rose. But when Elijah called her Mrs., though no wedding had been said, yet the word stood like a new fence, strong, gentle. She saw his shoulder tilt just enough to cover half her body in the doorway. His right hand rested near his revolver knuckles, loose, the stance of a man ready but not inviting violence. Briggs tried to peer past him, hunting for a pair of eyes inside the house. He snorted, "I'll be back with a witness and a paper you won't like." Elijah touched his brim the smallest nod. "Bring your conscience with it. Out here, the wind can read what's on paper." Briggs laughed, jerked the reins, and wheeled away. Only when the dust unwound behind them did Buddy lower his head. Elijah turned and looked at Olivia from the porch. His eyes said what his mouth kept, "Stand behind me. Here you're safe." The thimble warmed against her skin like a small hand laid on her chest. By morning, Willow Creek met them with saloon doors clacking and strong coffee on the wind. Elijah and Olivia tied their horses at the weathered office with the fading sheriff sign. Sheriff Taylor, a bearded man with smiling eyes and a straight nose, looked up from his ledger when the spurs clicked tack, tack, across the porch. Hastings, he nodded at Elijah, then tipped his hat to Olivia. "Ma'am." The word didn't carry a city's weight, but it held the respect of a gatekeeper. Olivia exhaled. Her shoulders dropped 1 notch. They hadn't sat yet when Briggs walked in with 2 long-pressed fellows whose eyes were thin blades. Sheriff business. He slapped the handbill and a sheaf of papers on the desk. "This woman is my client's fiancée. She took his money and ran. I demand she be returned." The sheriff flipped through the papers and slid his spectacles down. "This betrothal does it bear. Her signature," Briggs stomped. "Family agreement. Her stepfather signed. In Boston, that's enough." The sheriff looked up slow. "This ain't Boston." Olivia stood straight, fingers laced to keep from shaking. Elijah stood a half step behind No Touch, but present his shadow just enough to keep her from feeling the drop. "Sheriff," she said. At first her voice was thin, then it thickened word by word. I am Olivia Thompson. I signed no betrothal. I am of legal age. I left of my own will." From her cloth wallet, she drew a folded page from her journal, the date she left Boston, and the line, "Today, I choose to live." She set it beside Briggs's papers like a stone set on the other side of a scale. Sheriff Taylor's cheek tipped. Statement from the person herself, direct not through some other man. He wrote in his ledger, "Olivia Thompson appeared voluntarily." Then to Briggs, "You have a territorial judge's warrant." Briggs puffed. "I have letters from Boston. We don't use those to seize folks in the Arizona territory," the sheriff said, still mild. "I'll wire Prescott for Judge Harmon's guidance. Meanwhile, no one touches a soul in my jurisdiction without an order." Briggs flushed. "You'll answer if she runs." The sheriff cocked his head. "The door of justice is always open tomorrow or the next, but a man's gate only opens from the inside." He pulled a paper from a drawer. "Temporary protective order, signed and sealed. I'm issuing this for Miss Olivia. While we wait on Prescott, anyone who tries to force her will spend a night in my jail for disturbing the peace." He pushed the pen toward Olivia. "Sign your true name so the law knows who to call." Olivia took the pen. Her hand paused, once then wrote Olivia O, the O round as the thimble that fit. Elijah didn't smile, but his eyes lit like a lamp catching. Briggs hissed, "Sign or not, she's still Boston's." Elijah's voice rose for the first time flat as a still pond. "Boston doesn't grow grass here, neither does she." The sheriff closed with one short line. "No one's leaving here in custody today. If Mr. Briggs wants justice tomorrow, 9 a.m., me witnesses and Prescott's wire." Briggs lifted his chin. "I'll bring a witness." "Bring a conscience," the sheriff echoed Elijah. For a beat, Briggs slipped a half step off his timing, then gathered his papers and left heel edges scuffing rough sounds into the porch. Outside, under the awning, the sheriff's sign trembled a little in the wind. Elijah handed Olivia the checked scarf and tied back her hair. "You did good." He said few words, Western heavy. Olivia swallowed a taste, not quite tears, the salt of a door, opening from the inside, not kicked wide. That afternoon, a bruised dark band of plums edged the sky. Elijah changed into a stiffer coat, went to check the south fence ties, told Olivia to keep to the porch. Abby, back from town, set the Winchester on the high peg, as calm as setting a skillet on a hook. "The dog hear something?" Abigail asked, eyes on her work. Buddy rumbled, gaze fixed on the road. "Yes," Elijah said. 3 riders formed Briggs and his hires. They didn't seek the gate. They lined up at the boundary, hands resting on naked pistol grips. Elijah walked to the survey post and stopped there, the place Western rules draw between dispute and crime. "You're early," he said. Briggs spat and smirked. "I changed my mind. Justice comes at the hour, money says." Elijah didn't move, but his chin dropped a fraction. "Justice is something a person walks to when the sun's up," he said. "And right now, it's still evening." The wind shifted and puffed his coat. His right hand stayed near the seam, fingers loose. In the porch's shadow, Olivia set her palm on Buddy's back. The thimble at her throat cooled weather warning in the bones. Inside, Abigail said quietly, standing alongside, one hand on the Winchester, like a hand on an old friend's shoulder. "No," Olivia answered, voice trembling, but true. "I'll stand here." Briggs snapped his fingers. "Let's try our luck." One hireling yanked his gun free, a fool's move on another man's land. Buddy streaked to the fence, snarling. Abigail mounted the rifle to her shoulder, not aimed at a man, only thumbed back the hammer. The clean click cracked the hour. From the back road, 2 more riders came into view, the Wilsons from the general store and old Sam from the depot. They stopped off a ways, but close enough to remind Briggs the town has eyes. Elijah raised his left hand, palm open, voice steady past the oddness of it. No theater needed. If you want paper, the sheriff's door opens in the morning. Right now, you're standing in front of somebody else's gate at dusk. That's a thing even a house dog won't permit. The gun hand looked around and saw more eyes than guns. His shoulders sagged. Briggs's smile skewed. Dogs and women, some arsenal. Elijah tipped his head a line, blowing easy as the season's first breeze. Exactly. Loyal, and they know when to bite. Silence drew taut like a thread over the porch. Briggs jerked his reins and spat again. Tomorrow then, cowboy. Tomorrow, Elijah nodded. They turned their horses, the dust swallowing their pressed coats. Buddy chased a few paces and came back tail stiff as a broom. Abigail lowered the rifle and exhaled. Elijah stood at the boundary post a moment longer, as if nailing the quiet to the ground so the night wouldn't leak through. On the porch, Olivia touched the thimble and whispered a prayer only the boards could hear. Let us walk to the law's door with our heads up. Night tucked itself like a wool blanket drawn to the chin. In the kitchen, the lamp was turned low, golden light cupping the table. Elijah laid out paper ink and an iron-nibbed pen. Sheriff wants a statement, he said. Not for arguing tomorrow, so justice has words to read. Olivia sat. The thimble's warmth met her skin. Buddy curled under her chair like a living doorstop. Abigail set a mug of mint tea by her hand and slipped away, leaving them with a little tack of the stove. Start when you're ready, Elijah said, facing her fingers, laced ready to be a shoulder without touching. Olivia breathed and wrote, I, Olivia Thompson, came to Willow Creek on... The pen moved through a few words, then her hand stalled. Elijah tipped the ink and steadied the page's corner so it wouldn't slide. Go slow. He murmured the same words he'd offered by the campfire the first time she told her story. I'm afraid the words will betray me, she confessed. They won't, Elijah said. Words do what words do tell. Belief belongs to the law. My job is to stand behind you when you sign. He nudged the sheriff's protective order to one side like a lantern. The door was already ajar. Olivia wrote on, I left Boston under coercion to wed without my consent, having suffered violence. I came here freely. I remain by choice. I owe no one the right to command my body or my name. At my name, her hand felt light, like drawing the last thread from a long snarl. Elijah signed as witness. His strokes were short and straight as the north fence. You sign like you set a nail. Olivia set a small smile. Good nails, he replied. Keep the wind from pulling things loose. They sealed the page with beeswax, the sweet smell lifting the same scent as the afternoon they dug up the tin. Tomorrow, Elijah added, I'll mention Briggs stepping onto the boundary at dusk. Folks out here honor the evening. Break it, and the law frowns. On the porch post, among the shallow notches, Elijah cut a new mark with his pocket knife. For tonight, he said, for choosing not to run. Olivia set her fingertip on the fresh cut and pressed. Tomorrow, she said, Looking up, if they ask whether I'm scared, I'll say yes, but I'll stand. Elijah nodded. The light on his face wasn't lamp glow. It was something else, faith with a chair to sit on. When they blew out the lamps and stepped onto the porch, the stars looked like silver nails pinned into the dome of night. Elijah stood between her and the wind without saying it. It needed no second telling. Buddy lay across the doorway like a breathing latch. Olivia touched the edge of Elijah's coat. Just a brush, not a clutch. "Thank you," she whispered, "for opening Justice's door from our side." Elijah answered with the smallest sound. 9 a.m. Sharp Willow Creek gathered before the sheriff's office the way bees gather at the first bridge of honey in spring. Briggs arrived on time, pressed and pinned, dragging a witness, a saloon waiter, who claimed he'd seen Olivia asking about trains. Sheriff Taylor held up a fresh wire from Prescott. No legal effect to a betrothal lacking the party's signature. Territorial authority protects any person declaring bodily freedom. Any compulsion requires a court order. He set the telegram beside Olivia's statement and the protective order. "Justice doesn't need a shout," he said. "Just enough paper." Briggs bulged his eyes and played his last card. Mr. Davis's money was taken civil matter. The sheriff cut in, tapping the desk with soft, gavel-steady beats. "File in civil court. Here we're speaking of a grown woman's freedom, and of your bringing guns to a citizen's fence at dusk." Murmurs rose. Marjorie Wilson stepped forward and set her hand on the counter. The day she arrived, bruised cheek-split lip. I sold her a jar of honey and a roll of bandage. If Boston has eyes, Boston would have seen. The waiter scratched his ear. "I only saw her ask the train time." Asking train time a crime, now Abigail asked, voice dry as pine. The room chuckled not unkindly, just enough to snap the tension's thread. The sheriff nodded to Elijah. "Your turn." Elijah stepped forward, hat in hand, gaze level. "Yesterday, Mr. Briggs stood on my boundary at evening. His man drew a gun. I won't file a threat, this country's got enough wind to blow that word away. But if it happens again, I'll bind that man and bring him to you." Briggs hunched teeth tight. "You're all in cahoots." The sheriff's face didn't change. "We're doing what a town does, opening Justice's door from both sides." He slid the papers toward Briggs. "If you want to sue the civil courts in Prescott. As for taking people, this door won't open for you." Briggs scooped his papers, blowing a cloud of black talk. "You'll regret." The sheriff lifted a hand. "One more word, and I'll keep you for disturbing the peace." Briggs slammed his hat against the desk and stomped out. Across the street, the saloon doors flew open to take his temper. Elijah's spurs did not follow. The West has its own quiet kind of win. On the porch, noon sunlight poured down like honey. Olivia stood at the step shoulders, unhooked hands no longer twined. "Is it over?" she asked, hardly believing her own voice light, as after a fever breaks. Elijah touched his brim. A thin smile drew a line. "Nothing's ever over for good. But today the law called you by your right name." The sheriff came out and handed Olivia a copy of the wire. "Keep that," he said. "When a person carries her true name, justice knows which door to knock." On the way home, the wagon hummed softly. Buddy ran equal with the breeze tail-cutting commas into the day. At the Walker boundary, they stopped. Elijah pressed the EW button into a crack in the fur as promised and murmured, "You brought her as far as here." Olivia set a honey biscuit against the button, a wet smile in her eyes. "Thank you, sir." The wind lifted the sweet and carried it a message for a man who hadn't lost anything under heaven's law. Back at the ranch, Olivia took the packet of speedwell seeds from the shelf. Together, she and Elijah turned a narrow bed beneath the cottonwood where the tin breathed. They sowed, covered, watered. "Here," Elijah said, "your mother's green pasture, and yours if you want it." "I want it," Olivia answered. She slipped the thimble off, set it in his palm, then slid it back on a new ritual learned offer, receive keep. Toward evening, Elijah nicked a new mark into the porch post. Olivia laid her finger over it. 2 faint letters overlapped E-O, faint enough only the household could read. "If one day red dust comes to the gate again," she said, "we'll still walk toward the sheriff's door." Elijah nodded. Justice opens to those who open their own door first. Buddy yawned and flopped across the threshold. In the kitchen, the amber jar threw a bar of gold across the wall. Out on the range, the grass moved, like a blessing. And inside, the woman once hammered by a false court, a new sound began, the sound of a door opening from within. At Double H Ranch, justice isn't noisy. It's a cowboy's figure standing between harm and the one he loves. A town quiet and present at your shoulder. A crisp telegram calling the right name. And a handful of speedwell tucked into the earth promised to bloom on a day when fear is no longer in season. Part 6, closing the past night, perched over Double H Ranch like a tired bird folding its wings, dimming the day's sounds one by one. In the kitchen, the fire in the cast iron stove breathed steady. The coals glowed like a cat's eyes in the dark. Burning pine mingled with black coffee, the warm leather of a coat slung on a chairback, and the day's last trace of honey biscuits, blending into a thin blanket that lay over the shoulders. Elijah hung his wide-brim hat on the peg. His spurs clicked tack, tack, twice on the floorboards, and went quiet, as if the day had set down its weapons. Olivia sat on the hearth step, the silver thimble at her throat swaying softly with each breath. Her journal lay open, last page of the dry wind month filled to the edges. She reread the lines that wobbled with a trembling hand, the sentences that broke like fence posts in a storm, then closed the book and set her palm on its cover. Under that thin skin, her pulse had eased. Silence no longer threatened. It felt like a porch after rain. Buddy lay curled at her feet, shifting now and then with a small sigh, belly rising and falling like a sewing machine, the baseline rhythm of trust. "Long day?" Elijah asked quietly, taking the chair across from her tin cup in both hands. Firelight ran a bronze stripe along his nose. The stern in his blue eyes had loosened like a lake after the wind settles. Long enough, Olivia said, a smile as brief as a thread of smoke. "I watered the speedwell bed. The ground drank fast. The earth feels thirsty to green." Elijah nodded, looking past her shoulder, toward the fogged window, where night stood and didn't dare come in. "Out here," he said, "earth is like people give it a place and it comes up green." Her fingers touched the thimble at her sternum, pausing there as if closing a small lid. "Elijah," she said, voice low, "I'm still afraid. Not the old kind, not the gavel, not the cane, but afraid of waking one day on that train, again smelling that sharp cologne, thinking all this was only a dream. If it's a dream," Elijah answered, "the western wind's very good at waking folks." He tipped more coffee into her cup, his motion slow and steady, like snugging a bowline on a loosening rope. She watched his hands, the same hands that mended fence at dawn, freed a calf at noon, and set the honey jar back in its place at dusk. I think she said, "It's time to set a few things down." She opened the drawer by the stove and took out a creased envelope, thick Boston paper, Boston-style slanted letters, the ink scent thinned by years. The stove ticked. A little cake of beeswax she'd used to seal yesterday's statement caught the glow. Elijah set his cup down and didn't rush her. In the West, the things you lay to rest don't ask for speeches, only a fire, a steady presence, and a quiet enough night. "I want to. Mourn the past," in a gentle way she whispered. No cursing it, no scoring the letters. Just finish. Elijah nodded, eyes grave and warm. "This stove," he said, "is for heat. But sometimes, to get truly warm, we burn a little leftover cold." Buddy lifted his head, as if even a dog could understand that kind of sentence. Elijah opened the stove door. The coals were red as a ripe apple's heart. Olivia held the letter in both hands. Not enemy, not master. "I kept it so long thinking keeping was respect," she said, eyes steady on the fire. "But respect isn't hauling a stone in your chest forever." She breathed and willed herself not to read a single word. The moment the paper felt heat, the flame caught. It ran along the slanted lines like a snake across sand. The old ink rose and stopped smelling like power. It smelled like ash becoming. Elijah stood half a step behind her hand on the stove rim, his warmth falling over the back of her neck like an invisible coat. "Watch it through," he murmured, "all the way to coal." Olivia watched, no flinching, no turning away. She saw the word debt once, as big as a city, shrink hollow and break into soft black pieces. When the sheet sagged into char, she used the wooden tongs to ease it deeper into the heart of the fire. The thimble tapped her breastbone with a small click, like a memory's button closing. Done, Elijah said one word, fit for any rite. He shut the door, and only then set his hand on her shoulder, warm and sure. Olivia tipped her head back, her eyes blurred without heaviness. The drop that fell wasn't defeat. It was dew, waiting for the sun to lift it. "I thought it would hurt," she said. "Turns out, it only lightens." Elijah's smile was a thin line. "When you let go of a stone," he said, "your fingers remember they were made to hold other things." She turned face near the fire near him. "Tomorrow," she said, "I'll fight if I must. But tonight, I don't want to fight no one, and not myself." Elijah nodded. "Then tonight we eat honey." He answered plain, on purpose, pushing the dark back an inch. He opened the jar and spooned 2 small pools over warm biscuits. They ate standing by the stove, like 2 people finishing a simple wedding rite. No rings, no flowers, only fire, honey, and a shared yes. Buddy hopped up once and licked the drip on Olivia's heel. She laughed. The sound rose, touched the wood ceiling, and fell soft, not bouncing back at her face like it would have in Boston. She reached for Elijah's hand, not as a falling person, but into a palm already offered. He held with just enough pressure for a heart to know where it belongs. Outside wind slipped over the yard. The bell on a cow chimed twice small notes in a peaceful night. The breeze shifted, carrying desert night into the kitchen, dust and stone sage and cold well water. Elijah trimmed the lamp down, stepped to the porch, and fetched the small knife tucked behind the post. On the beam, The thin notches from earlier nights sat like the house's private calendar. A night that closes the past, he said, setting his palm level with his chest, deserves a mark. Olivia stood beside him and touched the thimble to the post. The faint metal on wood sounded like a seamstress signing the hem she'd just mended. "Elijah," she said, eyes on the knife. "Do you want to hear me say this?" "I do," he said, without looking up, as if the sentence needed to sink into the knife so the wood would testify true. "I want your name," Olivia said. The wind paused. The blade stopped mid-grain. Elijah turned slowly. The lamp drew a ribbon of gold over his blue eyes, surprise there and joy, in the careful hands of a man who won't jostle a glass that's found its still place. "You're sure?" "Sure," she nodded. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was nailed true, like a spike in a porch post. "Not to hide from anyone, not to prove a thing. Just because when someone says, 'Mrs. Hastings,' my heart doesn't run anymore." He didn't sweep her up, didn't pour out long thanks. He cut 2 small letters beside the little tally marks, OH, unshowy, so faint only home eyes would notice. "Name first," he said, voice rough as sanded boards. "Ceremony can follow." Olivia laughed through tears and pressed a fingertip to the new letters. It felt like stamping a page already signed. Out in the yard, Daisy snorted and pawed twice. Buddy answered with a small bark, seconding the motion. "Tomorrow," Elijah went on, "I'll tell Reverend Collins to put it in the book. Sheriff Taylor will witness whatever's needed. But tonight, we write it in wood, in wind, and in the scent of honey on the table." He opened his hand, not pulling only offering room. Olivia set her hand in his and felt skin fit to skin the way a bowline slides into its loop, holding without choking. The roof line lowered into night. Stars began to tack silver into the dome. Olivia leaned a shoulder to the post and let out the sentence she'd never dared. "I'm not afraid of the future anymore." Elijah tipped his head. "Why's that?" She smiled, eyes on the field's dim edge. "Because the future is only a string of small work light. The fire on time, pour the honey just right. Tie the right knot, notch the right wood." He nodded. "And in the West, that's a philosophy folks take a lifetime to learn." The stove settled to an easy glow, coals you can look at without flinching. Olivia pulled a chair and sat across from Elijah. She turned the tin cup once and heard metal kiss wood like a distant bell. "I owe you a thank you," she said. Not courtroom formal, not boundary line shaky, more like writing a line in a diary after the soup is done. Elijah almost waved it off his habit, but she lifted a hand. "Let me say it. Thank you for standing outside the circle of fire that morning, holding the pan so I wouldn't burn." She counted on her fingers, like counting the new seeds she tucked into the bed. "Thank you for saying my name at the fire so I wasn't just somebody. Thank you for tying the bowline, teaching me the knot that doesn't close on a throat. Thank you for calling me Mrs. at the gate before any paper. Thank you for standing at the line so a stranger saw your back before he ever saw my face. Thank you for cutting the porch post so when I come home late, I know I'm at the right house." Elijah listened. No ducking, no stepping aside. The fine lines the wind and sun had drawn on his face softened like spring water poured over hot stone. "I don't do big things," he answered quietly. "I just stay." "Stay," Olivia repeated, and this time she gripped his hand. Staying is the big thing. The words big and thing carried no boast in her mouth. They were as light as placing a biscuit on the proper plate. Then let me say a line too. Elijah went slow. Thank you for not running. Olivia laughed the kind of laugh that undoes a knot without cutting anyone. She slipped the thimble's cord from her neck and laid it in his palm. Hold this for me a minute. He frowned just a little, but cupped it anyway. Olivia rose, found a square of linen, a needle, and the beeswax thread. She knelt by his chair and stitched the tear in the O-glove from the calf rescue. The needle went straight and steady. The thimble was absent from her finger, but present in his hand, like a reminder that she could mend herself now. And all he needed to hold for a moment was the light of that habit. When she cinched the final knot, she slid the thimble back onto her ring finger and pressed. Done, she said. Elijah turned his palm. The cool, round ghost where the metal had been lingered like the aftertrail of a falling star. Tomorrow, he said, we hang a new sign behind the barn. Double H, Hastings, and Olive. She teased, then shook her head and softened. And Olivia. Two names standing side by side like two horses led in tandem, neither dragging the other. I'm not worried about the future anymore, she said again, because the future is what we already started today. Naming, marking, sewing, keeping watch, writing it down, and when we must, burning a letter. Elijah wrapped her hand. His thumb moved over her wrist's pulse the cowboy's way to say, I'm here, and your rhythm's safe. Outside, the wind turned just a hair. The bell chimed two thin notes like a signature at the end of a paragraph. They banked the fire carefully, the way you fold a letter to keep its scent. Elijah smoothed the outer ash with his boot heel. Olivia dripped a little water, listening to the last breath of steam go quiet. On the porch, Elijah cut a very fine notch, so fine you'd miss it from 3 steps away. For the night you set it down, he whispered. Olivia pressed her fingertip over the new mark, still warm from the blade. At the doorway, she paused, looking back at the kitchen honey jar, in its place lamp, trimmed low, the O-gloves hanging beside the second saddle hook. Everything as if no storm had ever tried the walls. Good night, she told the house a new habit, childlike and true. Buddy changed positions and lay across the sill, speaking in the language only dogs know safe here. Elijah doused the porch light, but left a small lantern in the window, gold as a whisper. If you dream, let it be warm. That night, Olivia slept long and clean. No cane on marble, no polished shoes, rasping carpet, no train, shriek, tightening her throat. Only far wind and grass, rubbing itself together like old hands soothing a child. At dawn, when the yard's roosters traded calls, she woke half a minute before first light. Dew saddle leather and fresh ground coffee slipped in through the door crack. Bare feet touched the cool floorboards. The wood set a soft kurr like a greeting. Elijah was already in the kitchen spurs, silent because he wore socks. He looked up when she came in, eyes bright in that western morning way, where happiness is measured in small tasks waiting. Good morning, Mrs. Hastings, he said, as naturally as weather. Not showy, not staged. Just a name that had found its rightful hook. Olivia stopped for a breath, then smiled. That name didn't make her heart run, it made it take a seat. She stepped behind him and laid her hand over his on the coffee scoop. I'm here, she said, and I'm grateful to be here. He turned. The distance between them was right for breaths to meet without stumbling. Here, he said every day is a chance to start again. He poured water over the grounds. The smell rose like a brief prayer. Beyond the window, the red rim of the hills picked up its glow. Buddy lapped the yard. Daisy nickered. Hooves tapped hardpan like bells. They carried coffee to the porch. Elijah pulled a small planed plaque from his pocket, E.O., and handed it to her. Hang it where you like. She chose the space beside the second saddle hook. 3 gentle taps, and the sign settled in true as a puzzle piece finding its place. The future, she said, is this little board, being here every morning. And the law's door, Elijah added, opening, whenever we need it. But tonight, Olivia smiled. The kitchen door opens and lets the honey roam the house. They sat on the step and let words go. Morning wind moved through, carrying the plain, sturdy promise of the prairie. There will be work to do, a road to ride, a sky to read, a hand to hold. Olivia set her hand on Elijah's, not asking to be saved, but to lead the day together. At Double H Ranch, the past closes not with a hammer, but with a kitchen door easing shut, a coal laid to rest, a thimble that fits, and a name called in its rightful place. The future doesn't worry her now. It's simply this morning, warm enough to finish a cup of coffee, wide enough to plant another row of speedwell, gentle enough for a young woman to say to a cowboy softly, I'm home. Part 7. Overcoming Fear. The moon rose round as a silver dollar polished by dew. The western hills above Double H Ranch glowed with a soft phosphor. Grass turned to pale side pebbles, flickered like fish eyes underwater. Olivia pulled on a thick wool sweater fingertips, finding the silver thimble at her chest, and walked slowly along the dim dirt track. Buddy paced the hem of her skirt, sometimes tipping his face up to hers, sending white breath into the cold. Below the house and timber barns rested inside a thin wash of porch light. Farther off, Willow Creek was a clutch of sparks, like a handful of fireflies. The saloon door glowed the depot lamp, the Wilson's roofline. And farther still, where earth met sky, a long bead of light slid now and then, the night train. Desert wind brushed her with cold fingertips, carrying dry sage and the salt of soil. Above clouds were thread-fine threads she'd learned to wax with beeswax so they'd glide through cloth. Elijah's spurs didn't ring behind her tonight. He knew when a soul needed to take a hill alone. But she knew this too. If she turned, there'd be a man leaning a shoulder to the porch, post arms folded, not sleeping, just listening to the wind. That knowing steadied her steps over stone. She stopped where the ground leveled and low cottonwoods gathered. She looked straight toward the depot. Far off, the train whistle drew out thin as wire pulled across the tender place of a heart. Nights upon nights, it had been the latch pulling her back to Boston, to cold stone corridors, that harsh cologne men's shoes pressing rugs. But tonight, she stood tall, both hands open, as if tying a bowline in herself, secure, not choking. I'm here, she said softly. She called no one, challenged, no one she spoke to. Fear the way you speak to a horse, stand still now. Let me lay a hand on your neck first. Buddy gave a small whine and rested his chin across the toe of her boot. She bent and stroked his head, felt the warm coat, the even pulse. Tomorrow, she whispered, if I'm still shaky, that's all right. But tonight, I want to look straight into those lights, without looking away. The moon climbed a notch. The pasture turned into a fresh sheet of paper. Olivia touched the thimble to her lips and let it fall. She turned toward the house and saw the barn shadow like a big, gentle animal asleep, and the porch drawn in a slim line of gold. A quiet ease between her ribs, not the quiet of forgetfulness, but the peace of someone who has chosen where to stand. When the whistle sank out, the wind veered and brought her the faintest coffee from the kitchen. Olivia smiled a smile only she could hear and lifted her face to the wind. One more step, she told the night. One more step. She sat on a flat stone knees, up arms around them, the thimble going cold, then warm. In the moonlight, memories showed like shadows, edges depth, but no sound. She opened the small pocket journal she'd brought. The paper was dark as the hour, and she wrote with a white pencil, a trick Abigail had taught her. Dear Fear, tonight I give you a chair on the hill. Sit. I'll stand. The sentence came straight without a quiver. She added, and love, if you're near, don't be afraid to step closer. A spur sounded faintly down below, not close, only an echo from the yard. Olivia closed the book. She didn't have to look. She knew where Elijah was behind her, far enough that his concern wouldn't press between her shoulders. For a while, there was only wind and a nightbird's wing cutting air like a scythe through grass. Olivia untied her checked scarf, gathered her hair back, left her temples open to the thrum there. She picked up a twig, pared a clean point with the pocket knife, and drew a long curve in the dirt. Not any letter at all, just the day's path, for a courage that was exactly enough. The whistle called again, closer. Down there, the depot lights bunched like beads on a string. Wind carried the oil sweet of the engine, late thin braking fading. Olivia stood. All this time, she said aloud, I only walked to the threshold and went back in. Tonight, I open the door and step into the yard. She turned her back to the tracks and looked homeward. From the porch corner, the lantern cast a narrow run of light, like a slow leak from a cistern, small but steady. Suddenly, she thought of the tin box under the cottonwood, and the verse Elijah's mother had copied. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. This hill, this moon, this wind, this was a western pasture. She took a step, not down the hill, but one step further inside herself. The words surprised her with their calm. I will love you if love is a name called right. The wind lifted the sentence like a towel on the line, billowed it once and laid it back over her shoulders. Far off, a coyote called. Buddy answered with 2 short notes. Watchman sounds, not a dare. Olivia touched the thimble once more. Inside her, the ashpan settled. She turned toward the house. On the slope, her shadow and Buddy's stretched long, then shortened at the porch. On the 3rd step, a spur tic-tac, not to announce, only to speak, I'm here. Olivia understood. The far lights were no longer a summons to go. They were a star to take a bearing. The road she had already chosen bent home. Elijah leaned on the post, hat pushed back, a cup steaming in his hands. I guessed you'd pick the hill, he said, voice low as a harmonica drawing wind. On rare nights, he played a little an unnamed tune of an old cavalryman. I didn't follow, and I knew Olivia said, but there's one thing, if you're willing. He lifted his head. The porch lamp climbed into his blue eyes. Say, I want to stand near the tracks, not to run to face the train. I don't want that whistle to boss my sleep anymore. Elijah set the cup down. No hurry. All right, he said simply. I'll ride behind Daisy for you, Rowdy for me. We'll stop by the cottonwoods above the canal. We won't need to be any closer. He went to the barn, quick and neat. The cinch sliding home sounded like someone writing a sentence fast. He handed her the saddle, laced his fingers as a stirrup for her foot, watched her mount, checked the girth, the way a man ties a bowline, no choke, no slack. Buddy hopped off the porch, circled, then took point when Elijah whistled him to keep to the canal bank. Moonlight turned the sandy road to milk. Warm horse iron sweat and sage opened the lungs like windows. They rode slow, silent 4 beats, pause, 4, the counting lesson of a child learning to read. Near the ditch, Elijah raised a hand. They tied off to a picket and led through the low willows. The train's dark body slid toward them, yellow windows rolling like the warm eyes of a snake. Here, Elijah whispered. Stand behind the cut. Wind's out of the west. The smoke will run the other way. The train came faster than memory. Steel rang long and thin, flinging fine dust across the grass. Olivia stood tall. She didn't step behind him, but she held his hand tight. For a breath, the old shove came at her back, the whole life of running. But Elijah's real hand guided her toward standing, not retreat. Watch the lights, he said. Don't listen to the sound. She fixed on a window, and for an instant saw a woman stoop over a child, a conductor yawning a man asleep, with no idea how his neck would feel come morning. That whole world wasn't looking at her. No one on it had the right to call her name anymore. The train swept by. The shriek thinned to wind, and the wind thinned to quiet. A hand towel someone had left in a window leapt out and fell along the verge. Buddy fetched it back as if he'd won a flag. Olivia laughed the laugh of a person who stood at the verge and did not shake. In that laugh lived water slapping a bank Daisy's deep inhale, Rowdy's impatient hoof. Elijah didn't say, "Good job." He said, "Done." She turned to him. "You all right?" he asked. "I am," she said, and then, "Not yet enough." She lifted her face and let a full breath go. "I love you." The words fell into the moonlit night without ring or veil, just warm leather, friendly metal, and a hand still holding a hand. Elijah blinked like the wind had caught his eye. His mouth tipped a little, the moon hooked there. "I love you," he said, no since when no, for how long? In the West, the best sentences are short. They sat on the canal bank until the train dust settled like ash in a stove's mouth. Elijah drew out a small harmonica and played a quiet air. Not the cavalry call, but something he'd made up, a hummock, a water edge, an owl asking after a friend. Olivia set her head to his shoulder, not to hide from any sound, but to let the music find its right pitch. "I think I just cut a noose," she said, "and tied a bowline." "Yep," Elijah said, "a knot to pull folks up a bank not close around a throat." She slipped off her check scarf and knotted it to his hatband, a soft loop smelling faintly of flour and honey. "So the wind knows there's someone at your house who won't leave when it changes," she murmured. Elijah thumbed the knot habit, never trusting a knot he hasn't tested. "Solid," he said, eyes smiling. "But if the gusts get mean, I'll unfasten and tie again. We can always tie again." He fished a thin tack from a small cloth pouch, the kind used for old signboards, and set it in her palm. "Tomorrow, drive this into your second saddle hook. Call it the nail that won't drop. A coyote cried from the flats. Buddy rose, listened, and lay back down. He knew distance. Olivia glanced toward the cottonwood where the tin box slept. Day after tomorrow, she said, I want to read your mother's verse out loud there. And if the speedwell splits its seed coat, I'll lift one sprig and set it in the kitchen window. Elijah nodded. One day soon, he added, I'll speak to Reverend about writing Hastings in the book. One day soon, she grinned, I'll learn your tune. She put the harmonica to her lips and drew one clumsy note. It was honest like the first time a child ties a shoe. Wind shifted. The moon slid down the hill's shoulder and spilled silver. Elijah stood and stretched and reached for her. The reach wasn't rushed or crowned with ceremony, just the right weight for a body that had set a burden down. Let's go home, he said. They led the horses not riding, letting their souls talk to the earth a while. Buddy trotted ahead, chest proud, the runaway towel clamped like a trophy from a bloodless fight. Near the porch, Elijah stopped and turned. One line, he said. Olivia met his eyes. I'll get it wrong. I'll go quiet too long sometimes, and I'll flare. But I'll stay. When fear comes back, I'll stand with you on the hill by the tracks in the kitchen. I won't let you walk to a hard door alone. Olivia blinked. This time, tears from lightness. Me too, she said. When the whistle pinches you, I'll open the stove. When the wind wears you down, I'll mend the glove. When you're lost in the grass, I'll call your name. They leaned their foreheads together once unhurried. Above them, the stars scattered thin as salt and melted into hair. At his hip, Elijah's gun lay quiet, a bone that had quit aching. Tonight justice came home by another road, the road of promise and staying. Morning found the porch already sitting there in a pale gold coat. Olivia stepped out with 2 coffees, bare feet on cool boards, the soft crrr of wood saying hello. Dew still sat on the grass tips, shining like the earth's good sweat after a night's rest. Elijah was in the lot palm, along Daisy's saddle hat tipped. His spurs were wet bright with dew. He turned at her sound and smiled without noise. Buddy loped a circle and dropped last night's towel at her toes, as if delivering the old fear's title back to its owner. Want to check the speedwell, Elijah offered. Let's, Olivia said. They followed the cottonwood bank, where the tin box breathed. The soil had lifted tiny green spears straight shore. Olivia knelt fingertips damp and gave each sprout a greeting. Good morning. She recited the small verse again. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. Her voice didn't plead. It sounded like a report last night I lay down. Elijah handed her the tack. She set it into the second saddle hook, 3 small even taps. The sound of tack meeting wood was like a heart reaching a decision. Nail that won't drop, Elijah said, mouth bent. And if it drops, Olivia smiled, we pick it up and drive it again. They stood quiet and listened as the last late crickets gave way to the steady chew of horse and to each other's breathing, lengthened the breath of people who've learned how to sigh without fear. Back at the porch, they hung the small EO plaque beside the hooks. Sun struck it. The letters shone like set honey at a jar's lip. Olivia went to the stove, coaxed the fire, set a pot of porridge. Cinnamon rose. Outside, Elijah tossed a loop, the rope drawing a clean circle in the air and falling right over the post, each throw a new day. Elijah, she called. Do you know, I got over an illness last night. What illness? Imagining the worst possible future. Elijah laughed, and this morning his laugh sounded like sunlight. He came in hands carrying leather and rope and grass. Olivia handed him a cup. She touched hers. To it clinked the sound of two people done with a primer lesson. Tonight, she said, let's hang a porch swing. So when the wind's strong, it sings. And when the wind's quiet, he added, we'll listen to each other. She set her hand on his, and this time it didn't tremble. I've come through fear. Not because fear is gone, but because I know who walks with me. Elijah dipped his forehead to hers, exactly one beat. Outside, Daisy nickered. Rowdy shook his mane, and Buddy stuck his nose into the new speedwell and sneezed, making them both laugh. The sky lifted an inch. At Double H Ranch, the woman who once shook at a whistle now only narrows her eyes at sun. She still wears the thimble not to guard against the thorns of memory, but to remember these hands can sow warmth for tomorrow. And the cowboy beside her still carries a small knife, not to slash the wind, but to score fine marks on the porch post. Each one a night they chose to stay, each one a morning they chose to go on. From fear to courage turned out to be the width of a single hand taking another. After that, the rest is work and coffee and calling each other by name until even the wind understands the home is here. Part 8. Steady Action. Dawn pulled a thin gold line across the sill like a skilled tailor chalking cloth before the first stitch. Olivia woke half a cock crow, early the smells of coffee and damp wood working into her hair. Her fingertips found the silver thimble cool against skin and warming with her breath. In the kitchen, Elijah swung the kettle over the cast iron, the lid giving a short, crisp tack when the steam kissed it in order to start the day. Eat so you've got strength, he said, setting a honey biscuit and a thin slice of salt pork in front of her. No extra words. His hands had already coiled a rope tight and tidy as a small wheel, not a strand loose. On the porch, Buddy paced nails skittering the boards as if writing a hurry-up note. Daisy poked her head in puffing white calm eyes, tracking every move. Olivia pulled on her boots, fingertips pausing at a scuff left from an older day. Elijah bent, not touching her foot, only catching the bootlace at the throat and snugging it one clean notch. She didn't say, thank you, just let a long breath go. In the West, the best morning thanks is given in the way you breathe. She knotted her checked scarf at the nape thumb, passing over the bowline she'd tied herself. He'd taught it. Her hands had learned it. They stepped through the porch. The early wind brushed their faces like a linen cooled with dew. Elijah's spurs ticked tack, tack. On the steps, familiar rhythm settling Olivia's heart like a clock. In the yard, he set a mended pair of gloves in her hands. The rip from last night's stitch smoothed the edge soft as a promise. Only as he passed them over did he meet her eyes brief and direct. South fence today? Then push a bunch of calves onto fresh grass. Sun'll bite by noon. Bring water. Olivia nodded and swung onto Daisy with the calm of a woman who'd already stood her ground before the night train. Elijah laced his fingers as a stirrup, not boosting hard, letting her use her own strength, only holding what she needed. Saddle leather horse sweat, and drying sage braided into a smell that opened the lungs. They eased out the gate, the wheel of time bumping its first note of the day hoof on gravel, the sound of salt shaken on a hot iron. On the trail, Elijah handed her a smaller coil. One sentence of instruction: keep the circle alive. She repeated it inside and smiled. Here the orders of work were also charms for the heart. Beyond the fence, the field lay flat to the pale sky. The breeze carried the canal's wet old cottonwood wild barley. A few puffed sparrows hopped the wire, then flared off when Buddy arrowed past his breath, sewing the morning at an even stitch. The day began not with a speech, but with a string of right actions. The south fence ran a curve along a shallow ditch. Posts frayed a length of barbed wire slack, where some storm had tugged it loose. Elijah set a post. His shoulders rolled like an axle movement, so spare they were beautiful. Olivia took the pliers, learning how to twist wire without letting her palms slip. Whenever she fumbled, he didn't say wrong. He tapped the wire with the pliers' nose tack, showing where to cinch a hair more. She corrected. He gave a chin-tip nod, a half-inch of approval, warm as 2 sentences of praise. A deadfall lay across the ditch bank. Elijah shrugged out of his coat sleeves, up the quiet map of someone who has tied 1,000 knots showing in the forearm. He tested the lift. Heavy. Olivia stepped in without asking. She took the far end, set her shoulder to bark, counted under her breath. 1, 2. He caught the count and raised with her. The trunk came free. They laid it aside, breath thicker now, sap and shade, damp earth mixing with sweat. Elijah passed her the canteen. She took a pull and handed it back. He didn't drink, just touched his mouth, to the same place hers had no flirt, just the manner of a spare country share the warm spot. While she crouched to tie off the lower run, Buddy growled low. A green rattler had coiled in the dry thatch. Elijah didn't smash it or spit at it. He wrapped the tail end with his plier handle till it unwound and slid off. It just needs to know this is our trail, he said, eyes tracking it away. Olivia let her breath go, noticing that fear didn't leap to her throat anymore. It settled in the chest quieter, like a child who trusts the grown-ups know the way. They snugged the last turns. A nick lifted along her knuckle. She didn't hide it. Elijah pulled a strip of cloth from his pocket and tied it off not clean, as every knot he'd taught her. Nobody asked, "Does it hurt?" She glanced at the thimble on her chest, touched it once, then reached for the pliers again. Along the fence, grass tips leaned to the wind as if the field itself nodded yes. When they finished, they stood a while and looked at the work, the way folks look at a freshly plastered wall. Good, Elijah said. One word enough for Olivia to feel a small room in her chest, add another brick. The quiet after wasn't empty. It was full of pulse, the wire's faint VO. VO, under breeze, and the warmth still tucked under her bandage. No other words would have worked better. The sun climbed sharp as a new ground blade. The calves bunched on the old pasture, licking dry dew off stems, eyes going wide at the sight of 2 riders and a dog. Elijah twirled the lariat the loop round as last night's moon. "No need to throw," he said. "Just show the way." Olivia took the outside and pressed just enough. Buddy pinned the tail, giving 2 short barks when one strayed. No shouting, only rope whisper through air iron on firm ground, a low whistle now and then. At the shallow crossing, the bunch balked. Water hardly ankle deep, but sun on the surface made it look deeper. A dark-faced calf stood mid-line, drinking the smell, shoving gravel, refusing the step. Olivia eased to the bank, brought her eyes level with his. She didn't city-soothe with "be a good boy." She dipped her hand and washed her own face, letting the drops run down her cheek and neck. The calf stared puzzled. Elijah's brow lifted, his mouth twitched. Olivia dipped the thimble, set the cool to the calf's forehead, like a mother touches water to a fevered child. He shivered once, then took one step, then two. The flow parted, then rejoined, splashed, crossed. Elijah moved Rowdy up alongside. "You just taught with the one thing nobody else can, by doing first." The rare praise heated Olivia's throat. She didn't thank him with words. She touched a heel to Daisy to keep the line clean, gave Buddy the angle he needed, saved Elijah a second loop. On the fresh grass, the wind smelled greener. Calves butted for the joy of it, tails flagging like victory pennants. Elijah gave a short run on the harmonica, the quiet celebration of a man who doesn't celebrate loud. They took shade under the cottonwood and drank. Elijah split a wild pear with his pocket knife and handed her half. Juice ran gritty and sweet down their fingers. Olivia bit, squinting against the glare, and saw the edges of Elijah's eyes smile. He borrowed the thimble for a second, caught the last bright drops in it, slipped the cord back, and gave it to her again. Small act, but her heart heard it like a broom handle's soft rap on the floor. Not to scold, only to say, "I'm here." Headed home, they counted calves. Habit for numbers, habit for trust. 17, Olivia said. "All there?" Elijah answered. 2 words, 2 people, 1 small herd across the water. No tallying credit. Hands tired, backs warm, only one thought in her head. Every tiny job done right today was a stone set true in the road leading to tomorrow's threshold. Noon planted a hot pin in the center of the field. Even the insect sound thinned under the upright sun. They came back to the porch. Abigail had 2 sweat-damp coats pegged on the line, gave them a smile, and left them to their dinner: flat bread, hard cheese, a handful of tomatoes. Elijah poured water, no ice, but the cups cool from the well. Olivia set the thimble on the table. Its small round shadow lay still on the plank, like a period. Elijah peeled his gloves. The honey-colored callus at the base of each finger caught the light. One seam had given along the edge. Olivia didn't say, "Leave, that I've got it." She simply threaded waxed linen, slipped on the thimble, and stitched. The needle ran. Her eyes followed. Her breath kept the same count as her steps at the crossing. Elijah watched without comment. Only when she thumb-knotted the end did he hold out his hand. "Give." Before she could, he tugged her wrist closer, blew once across the morning scrape already skinning over, and retied the strip neat. His palm was hot, the pressure light care written in the West's biggest letters right on time. A coil hung on the post. Elijah took it down and set it in her hands. "Spin it," he said. Olivia stood, drew a circle from the wrist, the shoulder guiding. The loop wobbled once, twice, then rounded out. Elijah stood behind without touching her elbow and tipped her heel instead. "Give it room. Don't choke the loop. A circle that breathes is yours again every time." Buddy sat, tongue out, eyes slitted with what passed for a dog's grin at people's games. Olivia twirled. She didn't throw, she kept it breathing. The motion was as plain and mysterious as a woman pouring honey after dark. Nobody asks the measure. You just know when it's enough. After lunch, Elijah pulled a small planed board from the drawer. He bored 2 holes, threaded jute, and handed it to her. "Little sign for the barn," he said. "Write what you like." Olivia took the worn, bright fishbone blade and carved slow work, quiet love, loud in deeds. She looked up and smiled, borrowed the Reverend's words, tuned them to our house. Elijah read, smiled thin and bright. He hung it beside the second saddle hook. Breeze tapped wood on wood spoon to cup light and sure. They lay back a minute on the porch planks, faces to the rafters. Heat waves danced over the far field like invisible rain. Elijah rolled propped on an elbow and studied her in profile. He didn't say pretty or beautiful. He eased a sweat-stuck wisp off her brow. Olivia set his hand back on her chest for one beat, not to hold, but to let that hand hear a heart that had walked out of fear into steady. They rose at the same moment, clean as a hinge enough to make Buddy lift his head, thinking there was a new order. Afternoon spread over the pasture like a blanket with wind under the edge. They went west to rake and stack. Sun in the hay gave off the smell of fresh bread. Elijah quartered the loop. It fell around a bundle. He snugged hauled. Olivia learned the locking tie feed cinch bend tuck. She went slow sure neat. The fresh callus at her finger roots helped the rope mind, less slip than a week ago. Elijah watched her lay the 3rd knot in a row and couldn't help the smile. He set his hand on her shoulder for exactly 1 beat. No longer, no less. Across the lot, a calf bawled. Elijah tipped his chin. "I'll go." She understood, yet pressed Daisy into a wider arc, giving him the small loop while she drew the big one. 2 circles closed. The calf found its mother by itself. From a distance, they looked at each other, and his nod this time was longer than half an inch. Blackbirds crossed the sky shadows running long over the hay. The sun hit the ridge red as a brow after a day's work. They hauled the load home and stacked it low. Elijah climbed the top and reached down to pull her up. She didn't stand on courtesy. Knee to the rail, palm to his palm, then up beside him, wind combing the sweat-cooled shirt. They looked out. The new south fence shone a warm, straight line. On the fresh pasture, the dark calves lay like notes in the right place on a stave. The canal mirrored a sky both soft and certain. Elijah dropped to the porch and scored a fresh mark beneath the little EO. Olivia stood with him and set her fingertip over the cut pressing. "For a day done right," he said. And for the sign in the barn, she added. They watched the plank swing lightly, love loud in deeds, catching late light like guilt. Buddy hopped the bottom step, panting tongue, lolling happy that people's labor was also his game run, bark stretch stop at the exact spot. Before Purple took the edges, Elijah walked her by the cottonwood. The speedwell sprouts had lifted another knuckle. Olivia bent and whispered water at first light. Elijah's palm found the small of her back, not ownership direction. "The path is here." They went in. Olivia laid fire. Elijah hung the porch swing they'd promised the new rope, giving a dry RE with its first weight. Inside, soup rose. Fried onion drifted along the stove's edge. Outside, the swing marked time with a quiet schoolyard tune. They ate with few words. Sometimes, Elijah looked at her hands around a bowl. Sometimes, she looked at the black resin still darkening his wrist from the wild pear. When they finished, Elijah washed and Olivia dried. Plates back to their places. The kitchen door closed with a soft latch. The porch lamp low enough to show 2 hats on one peg. 2 pairs of gloves, drying 2 saddle hooks under a board that said the sentence they'd both spent all day reading with their bodies. Night settled. Nobody said, "I love you" again. They didn't need to. The day had said it for them in a fence pulled true, a little herd across water, a calf's forehead touched with a thimble on its first crossing a loop, spun that never choked a sign hung in the right place. At the bedroom door, Olivia tapped the thimble with a finger like knocking. She whispered a line that didn't require an answer. "Tomorrow we do it again." Elijah doused the porch light and left the small lantern in the window. The wind slid past the post and read the new mark, and the sky, like a gentle judge, set a round silver seal on the roof approved. Part 9. A Silent Vow. Night settled over the roof like a cloak hung on a peg, quiet but warm. The pasture had swallowed every lowing. Only insects dotted the dark with thin sounds, like periods on a page. Olivia opened her eyes in the hush, her sleep caught halfway, like a horse not yet ready to enter its stall. She sat up and reached for the thimble at her chest. The metal kissed, cool for a beat, then warmed with her breath. The stove fire had been banked, leaving a face of coals ticking soft tack. Tack, like an old voice whispering yesterday's tales. Barefoot, she stepped onto the porch. The boards were cool underfoot and breathed a gentle purr. Overhead, stars scattered like salt, glittering across the dark between house and barn. Far off, the depot was just a faint band of light, no longer with the power to send her heart running. Buddy lifted his head from the rug, gave his ears a shake, then slid out to lie crosswise on the step like a living latch. Olivia pulled a thin blanket around her shoulders and settled into the new porch swing they'd hung that afternoon, the hemp rope still smelling clean and earthy. The door whispered. Elijah came out in socks, so the spurs didn't ring. Only the moon caught a glint off polished rowels. He didn't ask, couldn't sleep. He didn't say, "Come in, or you'll catch a chill." He set a tin cup on the arm-warm milk with honey and took the seat beside her, leaving just enough space for the breeze to pass between. His shoulder made a soft wall she could lean on if she chose. They didn't speak. They looked out toward the horizon, the way folks look at a road they've already walked with too many words and don't need any now. From the West Flats, a coyote gave a far call. Buddy only snuffled once, thankful, more than wary. Elijah braced his forearms on his thighs and laced his fingers, sometimes opening them like a man measuring rope before a bowline. Olivia set the milk down, let her head rest lightly against the porch post, breathing in pine and a faint whiff of saddle leather from the barn. Wind slipped through and set the swing humming a single long note. Both of them drew a deep breath, then let it out, and their breathing found each other's pace. In that lake-smooth quiet, the evening's vow wrote itself in things you can't hear. Warmth close by space, respectfully kept a shared blanket, a cup placed in the right hand. Elijah tipped his head. Moonlight pooled on his lashes. Without turning, Olivia slid her right hand onto his left, where it lay on the board. She didn't squeeze, just touched. And the night, like a gentled horse, stopped flinching at the wind. A long while, who knows how many harmonica measures passed. Elijah drew a slim knife from his breast pocket, the worn blade bright as fish scale. He paused, glanced at Olivia, asking without words, She nodded, eyes still on the distance. He bent and traced 3 marks in the dirt by the porch. A slow curve like the canal, a neat rectangle for a barn dream bigger, and a small circle like a well-cut 1 arm's length deeper. He didn't say "I want." He laid the knife down and touched each shape with a fingertip. Slowly, the West's language, when the heart might shatter under too many syllables. Olivia watched, then took a dry stick and added lines of her own. A purple speedwell, blooming by the porch. A tiny schoolroom in town, its window open for Abigail to hang white curtains, and 2 little shadows, hand in hand running the grass. She didn't hide the tremor in her wrist. It wasn't fear. Happiness always makes the wrist a little shy. Elijah looked the corner of his mouth climbing just enough for the breeze to notice. He set his fingertip on the 2 small figures and nudged them 1 notch closer to home. He reached into his pocket again and brought out a coin-thin disc of brass, a scrap of an old soldier's button. He set it at the center of the well. Olivia shivered once. Battlefields sleep in the ground like buried lead. Elijah didn't boast, didn't tell. He smoothed a thumb across the metal and pressed it farther down just to where a finger can still find it, as if burying a sound that's grown too old to ring. Moonlight slid off the brass and lay quiet along the knife. I dream of children running barefoot on the south lot. Olivia whispered voice, husky, and a small bell on the porch that sings when the wind comes. Elijah nodded, and for the first time that night, answered out loud, "All right." 1 word, but it had a roof and a foundation. That "all right" didn't promise rich or easy. It promised that the 2 of them would carry straw by straw, hook by hook, notch by notch, into that dream. Olivia slipped off her thimble and set it on the drawn well, pressing just enough to leave a ring. When she lifted it, a round band accidental and exactly right remained in the dirt. Her heart settled warm like a string brought true. Elijah didn't hand the thimble back right away. He cupped it in his palm for 1 long breath, warming an old habit before returning it. Then he slid it onto her finger again and gave it the tiniest turn to seat it. Small enough no one would hear, but the night heard, and the night smiled. "Come," Elijah said, then gentle as a drift order to the wind. He stood, shrugged into his coat, and tipped his hand. Buddy sprang ahead, favorite stick in his mouth like a standard. They looped behind the barn, without a lantern, letting their eyes open to the dark. Daisy drew a long breath at the sight of them. Rowdy tapped a hoof ready any hour. Elijah laced his fingers for Olivia's step, then swung into his own saddle in 1 clean move. Nobody asked, "Where do night rides? Out here don't need a destination. They need a direction." They aimed for the silver rise where Olivia had stood alone the night before. The moon had tilted west, but its spill was enough to show the cotton bushes cupped in fists like a child's sleeping hand. The ground was cool. Hooves beat the 4-count-4 of a well-tuned machine. At the crest, Elijah raised a hand. They dismounted and tied the horses to a low pin. The wind was higher up here, sage sharper stone, colder, a thread of ash in the air, no threat, only the scent of things finished. Elijah took a plain strip of wood and the last spare won't-fall nail from a cloth pouch and offered her the small hammer. "Where you choose," he said. She picked the old boundary post, where wind likes to talk, set the board at eye level, carved EO with his knife, then looked up at him. Elijah held and Olivia tapped 3 times. The blows didn't set the hill throbbing. They just asked Dawn to hurry by a heartbeat. "This is a vow made quiet," she murmured, palm still humming from the handle. "That will come back here whenever fear rises, to sit before we speak." Elijah laid his hand on the board and pressed once. "That will call each other's names just soft enough the wind has to lean in to hear." They stood close coats brushing. At the eastern rim, a line of honey light began to run, seeping slow across the grass. Buddy put down his stick and shut his eyes, as if he'd learned contentment too. Elijah lifted the harmonica and played a short piece, not sad, not merry. A counting song, 1, 2, 3, 4, inhale, exhale, wait. Olivia didn't ask for another tune. She let this one fill the empty rooms inside. She closed her eyes and pictured the 2 small figures from the porch, dirt racing the meadow, the porch bell chiming a thin, bright note. When she opened them, the sun had nicked the rim cinnamon gold. Without thinking, she reached for his hand. It was there already open like a porch. They were back as the kitchen started to wake. Abigail had left a pot of milk and a note drink up her kind, slanting hand. Elijah laid kindling. He didn't speak. Olivia poured 2 cups and dusted a pinch of cinnamon like it was any normal morning. "I want to write," she said softly, taking her journal from the drawer. She set the page and wrote 1 line, "Heard the wind, read our vow." Then she stopped. Nothing else needed to be said. Elijah came nearer, not in front of her, not peering over her shoulder. He slid a chair to the side and placed a sheet so it lay half atop her paper. He wrote small, so small you had to pull it close to read. "At every hard door, I'll sit beside you." He blew across the ink habit of a man who's written letters under open sky, then left it unsigned. Olivia smiled behind damp lashes. She turned her page over and wrote on the back of his line, "At every glad door, I'll open first." They didn't pass the pages like children showing sums. They folded them, sealed with a drip of beeswax, and tucked them into the tin box beneath the shelf, a place for things you don't have to carry, but want to keep. Elijah tapped the lid 3 beats the same cadence as the hill. Olivia slid her thimble down and pressed its rim into the lid. When she lifted it, the round imprint stayed a private seal from their own small court. Elijah pulled a chair to the window that looks toward the Speedwell bed, just breaking green. They sat not looking at each other, looking out. Daisy snorted a good morning. Rowdy shook his mane. Buddy brought the stick and dropped it at Olivia's feet, as if handing her the night watch for safekeeping. Elijah's eyelids lowered halfway, like a man listening to house music wind through Saddlehook's rope on Swing the Wall clock sipping seconds. Sometimes, Olivia said, I thought peace was a kind of dead quiet. Turns out it's a house where every sound sits in its place. Elijah nodded. The corner of his mouth lifted. And a person who doesn't ask too many questions. Olivia laughed and rested her head on his shoulder. It was stiff for a breath, then softened like ground after a brief rain. They stayed that way, letting winter draw back one more finger's width from the heart. The east opened wide. The silver drew away. Gold poured onto the porch. A bell out by the herd gave a lazy jingle. The saloon in town was likely spilling out its last drunks, but the wind couldn't carry it this high. Double H sat one ridge above those smells. Elijah stepped to the post. The small knife flashed. A fresh notch etched itself under EO. He didn't say, remember what we promised. He said, for a night awake without fear. Olivia came over, set her fingertip on the new line, and press signing receipt. And so the morning knows the names of two still here. She went inside for a little bell, bought some time on a trip to town, and hung it by the window hook. When the breeze pushed in, it rang once clear as water touching tin. Elijah looked up. His eyes held a cool square of sky. "That sound," he said, "when I'm far out on the range will pull me home." They settled into the swing again. Olivia drew the blanket to her knees and laced her fingers the thimble, giving a small, gentle shine at her ring finger. Elijah laid his hand over hers, thumb nudging the edge of the thimble the slightest bit, not to correct it, but to remember. "Say it out loud," he asked at last, the smile arriving before the words. Olivia shook her head, smiling back. They watched the speedwell push one more chute, watched the south fence show its wire, watched the calves shift their shadows from left to right. Somewhere far, a train pulled a long line across the air, but it drew on no one's heart now. It was only when, through a bottleneck proof, the world kept moving while this house kept standing. Buddy pillowed his chin on Elijah's boot and breathed steady. Daisy tapped a hoof, keeping time with the morning's low song. Elijah leaned in and let foreheads touch for one beat, the greeting of people who use few words, then eased back. Olivia closed her eyes, and a late drowsiness came like a gift. Just before she slipped under, she whispered a phrase too soft for people meant for the breeze. "Right here." Elijah didn't answer with speech. He lifted the blanket another inch and kept her hand in his. The porch bell sang a single note. The new notch on the post was still warm, and mourning like a courteous traveler, read their inkless oathwork, quiet love loud in deeds. When fear comes, sit side by side. When you dream, cut it into wood. Call each other's names so gently, the wind has to lean close to hear. At Double H Ranch, that's how two people found and kept peace in one another. Part 10. A New Day. The first light of morning slipped through the window like a golden silk ribbon, brushing gently across the wooden table that still held the faint scent of soap and last night's smoke. Out in the yard, the cowbell rang 3 lazy notes, answering the rooster's awkward first crow. Olivia woke to those small sounds of life, her hand by habit touching the silver thimble at her chest, cool for a moment, then warm, as if the heart inside recognized its own name being called. She pulled on her sweater, her bare feet finding the wooden floor, the boards greeting her with a soft creak like a whispered good morning. In the kitchen, Elijah had already kindled the fire. The smell of freshly ground coffee bacon sizzling in the cast iron pan and pine wood smoke from the stove mingled together like a hymn of dawn. Without words, he set a tin cup before her. His blue eyes carried the stillness of the night they had shared in quiet company. From the rug, Buddy leapt up tail, sweeping the floor, nose nudging her knee for command. In the stalls, Daisy blew a long snort, and Rowdy pawed the ground, 2 four-legged friends ready for the day. Southgate, Elijah said simply, his voice resting the word on warmth, not urgency. Olivia nodded. She tied her checkered kerchief, her fingers tracing the bowline knot she had tied herself. He once told her, "This knot holds, but never chokes." Stepping onto the porch, she paused by the post. Beneath the carved letters, E.O. last night's knife mark still carried the faint scent of steel. She pressed her fingertip against it, as if to sign her name, then moved on. When Elijah's spurs struck the steps, tack, tack, her heartbeat settled to match. The yard was thick with mist. Dew clung to Daisy's mane like white salt. Elijah cupped his hands for her to mount, only steadying the weight when it truly mattered. "Bring water," he reminded, nodding at the canteen tied to her saddle. Buddy darted ahead with his favorite stick like a little flag leading the way. They passed through the gate, the dawn spilling across their horses' backs, gilding their dusty boots. The pasture opened wide green at the new grass, golden at the old silver, where the ditch had run dry. Olivia breathed deep, the bite of sage in her lungs, the damp of earth soaking her chest. A calf pricked its ears, at them decided they were no threat, and went back to licking dew from the grass. Elijah handed her a small coil of rope. "Keep the circle alive," he said. She smiled. At Double H, even work commands carried the sound of prayers. A new day began, not with oaths, but with right gestures. Hand on the horse's mane, rope drawn through the true eye gate opened with the wind. By the time the sun crested the ridge, the barn changed tone. Abigail appeared at the stall door, a crimson shawl wrapped quick around her shoulders. "Alma's in labor," she called, stepping aside. Elijah and Olivia hurried in. Alma, the dapple-gray mare, shone with sweat, her flanks quivering. Her breath dragged long like an old rope pulled through a tight ring. Elijah spoke low. "Easy, girl. We're here." He mixed warm water, handed Olivia a clean cloth. She washed her hands. The first tremor in her palms steadied. Abigail poured more water, the basin ringing king as it touched the floor. "Push when it comes." Elijah murmured, his hand stroking Alma's back, slow and sure, like the rhythm of his harmonica. Olivia laid the cloth across Alma's belly, counting softly with each breath. Outside, Buddy lay still, ears alert, sensing the need for silence. The contraction struck. Alma groaned, mane trembling, eyes flashing, then sinking. A slick gray form appeared, trembling into shape. Olivia bit her lip, her heart relearning what the universe always knew. Night becomes morning. Elijah leaned close, whispering, "Good, good." Just 2 words, yet they stood like tent stakes, holding the canvas of a storm. Time stretched thin. Then the head, the shoulders, the body. The first breath burst out sharp, like hot iron plunged into water. A foal gray as stone with a white blaze kicked weakly at the straw. Elijah cleared its nose, opened its airway. Olivia warmed her hand by the fire, then pressed it to the tiny chest, her heat joining the stove's heat until the sputter became a steady breath. Alma turned, licking her newborn with long, slow strokes as if speaking its name for the first time. Tears spilled from Olivia's eyes, not the salt of night, but the dew of morning. Elijah said nothing more than "You did good," his fingers brushing hers as he passed her a fresh cloth. The foal wobbled onto its knees. All 3 of them laughed the laughter of sweat, straw, honey, and grace. Later, with Alma resting, they stepped back into daylight. The sun had reached the 3rd toll of the cowbell. Elijah carried a shovel, Olivia a roll of oilcloth. Together, they opened the irrigation ditch. The wooden valve stuck. Elijah wedged his shovel, Olivia patted the seam. 1, 2, now he called. The gate gave water rushing white and eager frothing like a horse's whinny. The stream wound into the furrows, wrapping the roots of young grass. Olivia waded ankle deep, guiding the flow, the cool water washing away some dust hidden in her soul. Buddy splashed, then stood still as a statue. "Let water do its work," Elijah said. The words seemed meant for her heart, too. They fixed fence posts, waved back at Marjorie Wilson, riding past with her wagon. They hammered the new ranch sign, Double H Hastings, and Olivia 3 clean strikes, hung it at eye level for any rider to see. The letters shimmered in the breeze as if smiling. Later, Abigail laid out stew and bread. Elijah and Olivia hung the brass bell at the porch, its first clear note scattered across the rooms, resting on bowl shelves and hearts. By afternoon, Wilson returned with mail and a small gift, a worn horse bell for the newborn foal. "So you'll always find him," she said. Olivia's throat caught some gifts were wrapped in cloth but tied with peace. Evening came like honey poured slow across the valley. They led their horses to the ridge. Below, Alma nursed her foal. The ranch sign caught the red of sunset. Water in the ditch gleamed silver. The porch bell sang in the wind. Elijah played the harmonica, low and steady. Olivia rested her head on his shoulder, listening. Boston, she whispered with a faint smile, was like a frame. Beautiful, rigid, and too small for the painting. Our frame, Elijah said, simply as the sky. She closed her eyes. "I think I've found home." "You are home," he answered, forehead, brushing hers. Buddy lifted his head, the foal's bell, chiming as if in agreement. That night, after supper, after dishes washed, and a final chime of the porch bell, Elijah and Olivia stepped outside once more. The carved letters E.O. glowed faint in the lamplight. "Tomorrow," Elijah said, with a quiet smile, "we do it all again." "Tomorrow," Olivia replied, "we love by doing." The stars scattered like salt. The canal water flowed steady, asking for no applause. At Double H, healing was never loud. It lived in the right knot. Tide, the right gate opened, the soft note of a harmonica, the jingle of a foal's bell, the shine of a silver thimble. A cowboy of few words, and a woman once afraid of trains had found a rhythm together. And tomorrow, when dawn crossed the threshold, they would stand side by side, opening the door from within. Every day is a chance to begin again. Sometimes silence is a promise. Have you ever met someone who made you feel like home? If you were in the cowboy's boots, would you stay to protect the town or ride off into the wild? Let me know in the comments.